We're joined by the Controller and Auditor General, Seán McCarthy, as a permanent witness to the committee, and he's joined by Mark Brady, Deputy Director of Audit. Apologies have been received from Deputies Pat Deering and Bobby Aylward. Minutes. The minutes of the meeting of the 20th of June, 27th of June and 4th of July, are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Matters arising. I don't think there's any matter arising from the minutes that we won't deal with through the course of the rest of the meeting. So straight into correspondence, and the first category, correspondence, the correspondence category A is the briefing documents and opening statements, reference numbers 2310 and 2313 from Peter Finnegan, Secretary General of the House of the Oireachtas Service, is his opening statement and briefing document for today's meeting. We'll note and publish this. Next category of correspondence is correspondence category B, which is from accounting officers and ministers and follow-up to PSE meetings and other items for publishing. The first item is from 2301 from Seán Fleming, who is Secretary General of the Department of Education and Skills, providing clarification in relation to the number information previously provided to the committee regarding Protected Disclosures Act 2014. So I think we can note, yes, this is education. Absolutely.
Yeah, I find this correspondence very confusing. He's kind of qualifying what he said previously. Now, this goes back to something we've discussed. In fact, it goes back to the last pack, Chair. So I'd like to hold this piece of correspondence until September and deal with it then, because I think there are a number of issues based on needing to analyse what he said in committee versus what is said in this letter. Okay, so will we note it and publish it?
Yeah,
fine, but I'd just like to return to it in our first session. Yeah, we'll hold this over for discussion for the next meeting. That's fine. The next item is correspondence 2309 from Jim Gibson, Acting CEO of TUSLA, dated 9th of July, providing information requested as a result of our recent meeting. He deals with a number of issues that we wrote to him about arising from the meeting. The first item is we asked for a note on any difference in remuneration for social workers recruited by TUSLA as opposed to those employed via agencies. He gives on table 1, the weekly social worker at the first point on the rate at €778 per week, giving net weekly pay of €556, and he's saying that that is €91.24 €91.24 of a difference between employing their own staff and agency staff, and nowhere do I see information in relation to detailed breakdown of agency staff at an hourly and equivalent rate. I don't follow the correspondence. I think we need clarification of that. I don't get that. Then the next item he talks about Five Rivers Fostering is a private fostering agency operated in Ireland, and they have approximately 42 staff and operate nationally with their head office in Dublin, and he confirms the payment to that organisation in 2018 was €8.457 million. So we note that. Then we asked, I'd like that clarified. Does that include the payments to the staff and to the fostering families as well, and a breakdown between what's paid, what it costs to run the Five Rivers organisation vis-a-vis what they pay to the fostering families, because that 8.457 million obviously presumably covers the cost of the fostering families as well. I don't know. It's not clear in the letter. Deputy, did you want to
just on that, just to clarify, maybe it's outside of procurement.
Yeah.
And they're currently
I don't understand this.
Yeah. They're undertaking a procurement now for that private foster agencies.
It says all private fostering agencies funded by TUSLA are
currently outside procurement.
And they're now undertaking
Is there
procurement.
A reason? Yeah. They're doing it now.
They're doing it now.
Yeah, but maybe somebody just could clarify, was it necessary or?
Well, obviously there's different rates by different agencies.
I can't recall whether foster agencies were included in the procurement figure. I know there is an issue in TUSLA around procurement and non-competitive procurement for services that should be or could be competed for.
Okay,
but that figure certainly sounds very high.
Yeah, so we need clarification on that item as well. The next item we spoke about then was a breakdown of the 18 million budget of the 121 family resource centres throughout the country. That's provided for each of those, and a breakdown of the one-to-one family resource centres by county. That's provided in the appendix as well, and a note on the operation of Children and Young Persons Services Committee, CYPSCs, and he gives a note on that. So I think we can note and publish this documentation, but we do need to write back.
Just it's helpful, and just, you know, like as all, we receive representations, and I have foster mothers at the end of their tether in relation to lack of backup.
Yes.
And then we have private companies that no procurement and lots of money. So my question, just practically, first of all, is on the procurement, number one, and number two, they're just following up on the 5 Rivers, because that's what we asked. But are there other agencies in addition to the 5 Rivers? A note on the 5 Rivers agency contract to include details of remuneration paid to them and so on. So I'm just, now to be fair to them, that's what we asked.
That's what we asked. But
it begs the question:
are there others?
Are there others?
Yeah.
And how has it been done? And what's the value of that? And more importantly, what's the value of that to people, mothers on the ground who are struggling really? I couldn't let it go, because I'll be meeting them again on Monday, and I've met them every week, like most of us have done. And they're at their end of their tether, looking for the most basic help from a health executive.
Exactly.
Can't see it, but can do it.
We'll ask for the details of all the fostering agencies and the amounts involved. Because we specifically only said one today in question. Probably they are the main one, perhaps. I don't know. So we'll ask for further elaboration. So we'll note and publish this item of correspondence, but we'll see further clarification on those items, which we're probably as well dealing with this now. We want to put a procedure in place in relation to correspondence that comes in over the summer, because we can't have a situation that correspondence is sitting here for a couple of months, and I'd like some method to circulate it. Now, I'll make one suggestion. I noticed in relation to parliamentary questions, we can get all information that's in by the 23rd of July. That's the last day for PQs, and then we can get further PQs can be answered by the 6th of September. What's members' views on, you know, I think only not too often now during the summer, but certainly for the end of July and perhaps the end of August, you know, or the first week of September, in terms of correspondence to be circulated to members, like all the items we're talking about. Now, because when we come back in September, it's not that we won't have to deal with it, but some of these are current issues that we're asking about, and if information arrives here next week, that we as members of the PAC
I think once, Chairman, once at the end of the month, July and August, I think that would do suffice.
So we'll ask, and we'll give the Secretary a holiday, a few days, you know, at the end of each month. Pardon? No, we need...
If it's circulated, it's going to end up in the media.
Pardon?
And we won't have a discussion about it. I mean, that's...
Yeah, no, we'll
We need to see it.
Yeah, now, and it is being circulated. It is being circulated on the basis of it hasn't been published. So I'd ask people to respect that. So the dates here were the 11th, around the end of July, the beginning of August, I think. You know, in 3 weeks' time.
Agreed.
And then as early in September as possible. You know, because probably a lot won't come in August.
Agreed.
Keep the papers going for the summer.
Yeah, we're talking about categories A, which is probably be none because there'll be no opening statement from, but category B is from accounting. We're not talking about the C correspondence from individuals about what, because we never publish that anyway.
Yeah.
So we're talking about items that would be in the public arena arising from a public meeting. So it's category B correspondence we're talking about. So around the end of July and around the end of August, and we'll give the Secretary a bit of flexibility, you know, in terms of getting the stuff to us. But, you know, it'd be dreadful if questions we ask today and the answer comes next week and we have to wait 2 months. So, look, I want to, you know, thank the Secretary. Do their best on that is all we can say. But just give us some, and they have the system in place for PQs to some extent as well. So we're not setting any new ground here. Okay, the next item of correspondence is 2312, it's from Minister Paschal Donoghue, dated the 5th of July, providing his response to a report on the examination of matters in relation to the receipts for corporation tax. We'll note and publish this. Now, I just want to say the Minister sent a note during the week. We issued this report on June 2018, and I think it probably just got lost in the mix in the department, the ministerial response. We have been getting responses to our other periodic reports, number 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 have been received. This, they probably spotted it wasn't there. So we can have a quick note of it, but a lot of it is in relation to items that are very much in the public domain for discussion. And there are issues, corporation tax will be continually coming back. But I just highlight briefly, our first recommendation was the concentrated nature of corporation tax receipts, and he said that we'd asked for a special report. He did one for the Finance Committee during the course of the finance discussion back some time ago, so he said the matter is under review. Look, we'll all be keeping that under review, we'll just note that. Then we asked for details of PAYE paid by participators in closed companies. So he said, to a large extent, closed companies' provisions are designed to modify behaviour of preventing certain activities. Revenue statistics provided to the committee indicate that approximately 4% of these companies paid a surcharge in 2015 and 4% of closed companies paid a surcharge in 2014. So I said these figures indicate the effectiveness of the provision, and the revenue is satisfied that the application of the closed company rules is achieving the intended purpose. So there's a 2-page response. I'm just giving the conclusion of his paragraph. We'll note and publish this. I'm on the bottom of page 5. So if any member themselves want to take it up, it's useful. We're coming into the next budget. People can use this information in discussion in relation to tax matters. That's not exclusive to the PAC. Then we had a recommendation on separating the carry forward losses for corporation tax between losses forward and capital allowances, and we had asked that the revenue seek to distinguish, have a separate line on their tax returns to capture that information. And he said that the Minister is saying he doesn't think it would provide a lot of additional information. However, the Revenue have since written back to us saying it's a legislative matter. They've separately told us they can't see questions, there's no legislative basis. So if members want that achieved, it's an amendment to the finance bill we're talking about. So we've taken it as far as we can in the PAC, and it's up to if somebody wants to bring it to the Oireachtas as part of the finance bill. Then we had, again, we had another conclusion, the sustainability of corporation tax, and again, he prepared a paper for the Finance Committee and he's attached it. You know, it's very much a current live issue. We note that. Then we had one, the double taxation agreements, and we had the department should ensure mechanisms are in place to verify any claims for double taxation relief made in Ireland by companies that are non-resident in Ireland. So his final paragraph in the response is, while Revenue do not have information from corporation tax returns on the number of non-resident companies who file returns in Ireland and the amount of corporation tax paid, they do not have available information in relation to any claims for double taxation relief made by these companies in their country of tax residence. So in practical terms, it would be difficult to obtain such information, as it is the country of tax residence that would be gathering or granting the relief for Irish tax already paid on the same income. So it would be primarily a matter for that country to verify the claim being made before that country grants double tax relief. So these are companies non-resident in Ireland for tax purposes, and the Minister is saying the onus is on the revenue authorities in the countries where they are tax resident. We made a fair point, and maybe there's probably a legitimate answer there as well. Then we're getting there. We spoke about the effective rate of corporation tax, and then he said it's not necessarily the case. We should examine matters to get the most appropriate method of calculating the effective rate of corporation tax. There's about 5 different versions quoted, 2 or 3 in the OECD, and every international body has a different definition of the effective rate of tax. So each report, he's saying, can add value because they have different nuances. So he's not agreeing there should be one effective rate because there's probably no international agreement on it. So he makes the point. Then we mentioned about real estate investment trusts. And we should carry out a review of these to ensure that domestic and EU ownership is being encouraged appropriately. So obviously our concern was many of these are from outside the EU, these REITs. So his conclusion is REITs, this is more provide a number of benefits for investors when compared to direct property investment, including diversification of risk, increased liquidity, lower entry costs and regular income streams. They were designed to provide investors with access to investment in real estate without buying property directly. This reduces the risk to both landlords and tenants that resulted from the more common model in the Irish residential market, in particular of an individual landlord owning one or two highly leveraged rental properties. That's a big political debate, the role of the REITs coming into Ireland to buy up entire blocks, and local people can't buy anything because they're all being bought. So look, I think we'll note his response, put it on the record, everything there. It's a matter for the really policy issues that we'll all be discussing.
I know, but I mean, quoted recently, you know, as the gift that keeps on giving. The thing about it is, I know it's a policy area, but it's certainly we would come back to and ask in time, was that value for money, where we can actually see, you know, in hindsight with we can see forward with 2020 vision that you can make that prediction now that it's not value for money. And it's gigantically frustrating that you can see that, and it's happening in real time.
Yeah. So my general comment on it is more a policy issue. Is essentially the legislation for the REITs is a form of, through the taxation method, of incentivising people for investment to achieve social engineering, to move Ireland to a rental accommodation situation, as opposed to people owning their own houses. Some might agree it's a good policy, some might not. But it does mean that the incentive is there for a large number of properties that are coming on stream to go into the long-term rental market, as opposed to people
at rents that are astronomical, absolutely not sustainable.
It's a big social issue.
It's a big value for money issue, as my colleague says here, really.
Yeah. So look, we note the Minister's response, and members can use that information in debates currently and into the future. Okay, so the next item of correspondence was from Derek Moore, Secretary General, Department of Finance, providing a response to matters raised at our meeting in May. There's a detailed response, and one I do want to thank him for it, and it's again an example I do make, like the National Treasury Management Agency here last week. They were on top of their brief, they were very professional, they answered the questions, and meetings go off without any hitch, and I would ask all departments to try and follow suit, and would make life much easier here for themselves in the first place, and for us as well. So this response from the Department of Finance, some of it has got to do with the IBRC, which we'll be discussing in private session in the afternoon. A note on the Fiscal Council Advisory Council, he provides that details of the two sets of litigants in the case in relation to the liquidation of IBRC, to include a note of the cost of defending the cases. He gives a history of the case, the one taken by David Hall, and he also mentions in the case Mr McKillen has taken a second, issued a second plenary summons by Mr McKillen in relation to a different matter. That's on the public record. A note of the advice of KPMG in relation to the IBRC liquidation, to include terms of reference and dates of contact, and he confirms in the letter, as part of the preparatory work setting up the special liquidation of IBRC, Kieran Wallace was consulted on a confidential basis as set out in the engagement letter of the 7th of February 2013 between the Department of Finance and KPMG. That's around the time of the special legislation going through. He said a copy of this letter was provided to the Committee on the 19th of January 2018 and set out the services provided to the Department in relation to the general restructuring advice and acting as a special liquidator. Then the next point he notes, next point we asked information on, a note and decision by the Minister not to follow the recommendation of the PAC to establish a committee of inspection in relation to IBRC. He gives a detailed response saying essentially at the end of the day a special what he's saying is a committee of inspection is really to protect the unsecured creditors. He is confirming in this letter that ultimately the only unsecured creditor will be the state, and as Minister of Finance, who is a shareholder, is the person dealing with that. So he is de facto, his department is de facto the only unsecured creditor, and he felt there could be nobody else on an inspection committee. There is no other unsecured creditor in relation to this. It will be the state, the taxpayer will be at the loss, and he's saying a special legislation to set aside the normal provisions in the Companies Act, because this was a special legislation with only ultimately one unsecured creditor to be expected at the end of the day, which he's saying the situation. It's a policy matter really. It's the legislation made that, and that's the essence of what we're discussing here in the afternoon. Our concern really is the lack of oversight by the department. They're not really doing as thorough a job as the Committee of Inspection would normally do, and we've highlighted that. They're not providing adequate resources. They're just monitoring what comes in. So I'll just read on. Then a note in the Exchequer, but please pull me up on it.
No, you're very good. Just go back to that Committee of Inspection and just explain it again to me.
Yeah.
What he's saying. I'm looking at it here. So.
Well, I give him my best estimate.
Yeah.
I've only had a glance at this in the last 20 minutes, actually. But essentially, in a liquidation, you have the creditors come together, the unsecured, and they kind of imply and regularly it's the revenue, but that side, it can be trade creditors who imply the liquidator to look after their interests or recover as much money for the unsecured creditor. The Minister is saying when we came to the IVRC, one, it was the bank had been nationalised. They decided to liquidate it, and it was clear at that stage the only unsecured creditor likely to be standing at the end of the liquidation process would be the state, which is the case, and that's now the case. So he's saying you don't need, he said the only unsecured creditor is one, the Minister of Finance, acting on all the decisions of Ireland. So they're saying that this applied the normal Companies Act Committee of Inspection legislation that would apply in the normal liquidation, because they're saying this was different. There was only one unsecured creditor, which itself was the Minister of Finance as the shareholder. So he said, I am the Committee of Inspector. I'm the only one looking for money at the end of this process to come back to me on behalf of us. And he said they set up, the department took over the job of the Committee of Inspection that would normally be done by a committee of creditors where there are several creditors. I hope I'm explaining it as best I can. Not defending it, I'm just giving it to you as I read it. Yeah. And the Oireachtas did agree to that. That's the other point. I know that.
Well, some of us didn't vote for it, whatever.
Okay.
It was 5 o'clock in the morning.
Correct.
We got it at 10 o'clock at night, and the criticism was there was inadequate time for scrutiny, and all stages passed. And in fact, the very point that was made was that we're missing things in this by virtue of the fact that we don't have the time to properly scrutinise it, and it had to be adopted before the markets opened. In the morning, we were advised. So the thing about it is very easy to miss things in that scenario, and I think it's important to say that if we're saying the Oireachtas passed it. But in the normal course of event, it would be a court that supervises a liquidation. This is the biggest liquidation in the history of the state, and the point that you've made is the point that we've been trying to make, and that is that it's the scrutiny, it's the oversight. Like if you look at NAMA, the Controller and Auditor General audits has a number of people who are within NAMA in having an oversight of what is happening. I mean, this was an Anglo-Irish bank, an Irish nationwide, and essentially people, we probably could be getting absolutely the best amount that is available from anything that's disposed of, but we don't have that same sight of that as we have of assets that are disposed of by NAMA, and it was an enormous amount of money. So, it may not be. It may not be that he's going to exceed. It's certainly not going to exceed to Committee of Inspection. I see the point, but there still remains a deficiency in the oversight.
And you're absolutely right. And when you stand back and look at it, as a result of the banking crisis, we put most of the debts into NAMA to manage and get the best return for the taxpayer. Public body, audited by the CNAG, in before this committee, in before the Finance and Public, total public scrutiny in relation to NAMA's activity. This was part of the same exercise. Bank debts were to set up a special liquidation process without public scrutiny, without the CNAG auditing, and without the Finance Committee of the House, or without the PAC having an oversight. Perhaps there should have been a subsidiary set up of NAMA to oversee the liquidation. In hindsight, maybe it's too late to have that conversation now, but in retrospect, I think there would have been all the oversight we have for NAMA could have been achieved here had we gone a different route rather than the special liquidator. But that's policy, and I think at this stage there's probably one of the biggest criticisms that we put the liquidation of IBRC away from public scrutiny and transparency. We didn't do it with the other bank debts. We put them into NAMA. That was a big call. And that's, I think that's probably the essence of why we're continuing to debate this issue, due to lack of transparency and oversight.
I personally was just trying to clarify it in a sense. So what he's coming back and saying is the committee, they disallowed that part of the Companies Act. So they disallowed it so that there's no provision now. They went out of their way. That's my interpretation now. But, disallow that committee.
He said specific. Disapplied. He uses the word disapplied. In other words, the normal provision that would apply, they're saying because this was...
Yeah, so that provision was there in the Companies Act, and the legislation that they rushed through the Dáil
took it out,
disallowed it in relation to this. And so now we're in a position where we've Mr Hall taking proceedings to bring clarity and to bring supervision and oversight that should have been there from day one. Yeah. I used the word fáinne fee yesterday in the Dáil, a vicious circle fáinne fee, but this is certainly a fáinne fee around in a circle here. We set it up, we take it out of scrutiny, then we put the burden on somebody in the public to get scrutiny, and we're going around here. It really is. It's mind-boggling, really. Not to mention the language and getting your head around the language alone, but for anybody else watching, saying, we can't sit here and say there is proper scrutiny of that process.
Can I just ask, I mean, obviously it'll come up in the context of the Department of Finance that is audited by the Controller and Auditor General. Well, what would have been the difference in the CNAG auditing this and auditing NAMA, or being embedded in the same way? Or would there have been a difference, or were you even consulted?
No, we certainly weren't consulted in relation to the matter. I mean, it's hard to say. I suppose in a way the audit of NAMA in itself is somewhat exceptional.
As is NAMA?
As is NAMA, yeah. So a special arrangement was made there. In the normal way where there is a commercial trading and a commercial activity, I wouldn't be involved in the audit. That's the standard. There is an expectation that market disciplines would drive commercial decision making, and therefore it's not necessary to have the audit by me and the oversight by Public Accounts Committee. I think that's the logic of the distinction that's made between me auditing state-supported activities and then commercial or quasi-commercial activities, your ESBs, Bord Gáis, Cuilche, and so on.
But there would be assets in IBRC that would be sold for less than they were originally valued.
Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being sold for less than market value, and I think that's really where you expect the driver to be the trading or the disposal of assets on a market basis. That's the obligation in the law. Now, that's what applies with NAMA as well, of course. And there can be a dispute in certain situations as to what is the best commercial return.
Yeah, my understanding is that IBRC, as liquidated, is required to sell to the highest bidder. That hadn't been the case, as demonstrated in the pre-liquidated entity.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why we're having a commission.
Yeah, and like if we recall back to that legislation, the NAMA legislation went through quite a lot of Dáil debate discussion. The Minister had some documents out there well in advance. It was highly teased. I'm sure there's still flaws. We spotted the flaws in relation to 172 here as a result of our work 10 years on, or maybe there's no much earlier in the department, but the Dáil didn't seem to pick it up when the but this one was emergency and rushed through, and you can see the consequences now. But my recollection is that the department were willing to come in and talk about that, and I think Kieran Wallace was due to come in before the committee as well. But as the court proceedings, once they initiated, it stopped the meeting that was going to going ahead. So one could argue why we haven't the level of scrutiny at the PAC now is because of the court case. And the department said they were most anxious to come in, and the liquidator was most anxious to come in and speak as much as he could. But once the court case was initiated, that stopped them coming in. So I just make that point as well. It is a pity there isn't public scrutiny here. And that we have a private meeting with David Hall and others in the afternoon as well on this. Okay, so we specifically have one on this topic. So I think our concerns are well being ventilated here. Then item number 5 is about IBRC. Item number 6 in this correspondence is IBRC. We will be noting and publishing all this, but we'll discuss it in private session. Then note 7 was a note on the Exchequer borrowing requirement to refinance commercial Irish water loans. It sets that out. Then note 8, a note on the year on decrease in loans to the Housing Finance Agency between 2013 and 2017 to include details of any impact on the availability of the Housing Finance Agency to deliver new housing stock. We'll note that and people will comment on that and use this information. Then we have a note on the possible fines which can be levied against Ireland by the European Commission in relation to missed climate targets, to include details of the availability of carbon credits and their potential to offset fines. We'll note that, and we specifically covered that in our periodic report during the week. And then we had a note on the 14.5 million recovered from Hanish Lumina to include details of the deposit account in which it is being held and the fees and interest applicable. There's a detailed note on that as well, and a hearing I just noticed took place on the 2nd of April 2019, and a judgment is awaited on that. That money has been, that approximately 15 million has been there generally in a zero interest account or thereabouts, and it's lodged with Danske Bank after a recommendation by the CNAG some time ago. So there's a note on that there. A note on the internal scoping exercise being carried out by the department to include details of the start and completion dates. This relates to the special CNAG's report on Ireland's transactions with the EU. So that's all noted. And then there's schedules on breakdown and categories of grades of staff. It's all set out there. 13, a note on the public interest directors appointed to various banks by the Minister to include clarification of role structures and recent appointments and when outstanding appointments will be completed. So you can read all that. We covered that generally what's there at the meeting. Then a note on the surge in corporation tax receipts in recent years and the development of GNI Star to include the effect of multinational activity in Ireland's contribution. There's a detailed note on that as well. And he gives the figures for 2016, 2017, 2018, and he talks about the budget contributions, and he's commissioned a paper. So he says, finally, it should be noted that Minister of Finance has commissioned a paper to highlight some of these inbuilt vulnerabilities and to quantify where possible the impact of such a shock. So we're talking about that the corporation tax issue. Potential solutions to this are presented in order to prompt a policy discussion around how best to mitigate against the emerging over-reliance on corporation tax. It is the Minister's intention to give consideration to these and possible other suggestions with a view to making recommendations to the government in the autumn. That obviously means before the budget. So obviously this review of the potential over-reliance on corporation tax is being reviewed, and we would expect to see information on that published before the autumn. So people should know that for the end of September. We need sight of that before the budget. That goes without saying. That's completed. Number 15, Department note on the projected changes to Ireland's EU contributions and money received in the event of Brexit. He doesn't give the figure. He says it's sensitive at the moment, but I think there was a figure mentioned by the Minister yesterday, the Minister for Foreign Affairs. And then there's a note on, the final item is a note on Post-National Lottery Company, which is in voluntary liquidation after the sale of the franchise, to include details of the winding up process and transfer of unclaimed prizes and any difficulties encountered. And they're saying that the board are saying, they liquidated all their assets, their cash on hand, but in relation to the transfer of expired unclaimed prizes, that did not impact on the matter because they were now defunct. But the fund is managed and controlled by the National Lottery Regulator, and while the private sector sought to have these expired unclaimed prizes to supplement their lottery prizes, the Department considers that the proper legal course is that these monies should be returned to the Exchequer in support of subvention of good causes, and my department has written to the National Lottery regulator accordingly. The regulator has sought some additional information from the department, which has recently been provided, and the department currently waits the regulator's decision. So that issue of unclaimed prizes is being dealt with the National Lottery regulator, and the department is looking for it to be returned to the department for good causes, and they're waiting a final outcome of the regulator on that. So sorry about all those long pieces of conversation or documentation, but it's good to clear them anyway. So we're now on to category C. These are from related to private individuals and other correspondence. This is from an individual 2253 dated 16th May request 2253 request from an individual dated 16th May requesting the committee to make an inquiry regarding the University of Limerick student recording system. There is a significant level of detail provided in this correspondence, and at our meeting on the 20th of June we decided to hold it over for further consideration. We previously requested the University of Limerick for a response, and the reply said that there was no record of a submission from the individual concerned. It goes back a number of years to 2011 and 2012. As the matter was highlighted here, this student has come forward and saying the field of grades in 2011 and 12 weren't adequately recorded, and they've written again to the committee, so it appears that the individual brought the matter to the attention of some individuals in the college, but not through the normal proper structures to get a regrading looked at, and they're now saying, I'm saying due to passage of time, that the colleges have said they're not going back there to 2011 and 2012. So it's not within the remit of a committee, and I don't think we can help any further. We've actually exhausted this with the university directly ourselves, and I propose we advise the individual, if she feels she wasn't treated fairly, the only option is to contact the office of the Ombudsman, because that is the only process at this, if she has not already done that. But we've taken it as far as we can. We're disappointed we didn't get satisfaction, but I don't think we can take it any further. Okay, next item of correspondence, 2299, that's agreed. 2299, anonymous correspondence in relation to Maynooth University. So at our meeting on the 27th of June last week, we considered the 2018 accounts and statements of the National University of Ireland Maynooth, which noted the provision of $750,000 in relation to the impairment of a loan to a loss-making subsidiary that was set up to commercialise intellectual property and to provide consultancy and training services. CNAG, am I right in saying it wasn't a provision? We noted it was a write-off, wasn't it?
Provision.
A provision.
A provision, so. Yeah. They had extended a loan to the subsidiary from the university to the subsidiary, and the university was recognising that $750,000 of the amount loaned was unlikely to come back.
Right. Okay. So the essence of the correspondence, we're not getting into details, as 229C, and I want to say yesterday I received 2 other anonymous letters on the same vein, and I've given it to the Secretariat, and I want to include all 3 of them. They're on the same issue, essentially, about the NUI Maynooth, solely as a result of us raising the matter here last week. And we have it listed as 2315 is also an anonymous document related to this, and 2229 also poses some questions on this matter. So essentially they're saying this matter was well known for a number of years. Why wasn't it highlighted before now? Why didn't the board, the governing body of the university know about it? They asked why the CNAG didn't know about it, and why wasn't it made known long time before now? And this letter also deals with the issue of part-time staff being employed on 0-hour contracts, 800 staff, the correspondence alleges, and they haven't proper employment rights. So what I propose, with your agreement, there's 3 letters following on from that $750,000 provision, that we would ask the Secretariat to write to the college, summarising the points from the 3 letters, and ask for the college to deal with these before the reply. We've already written to the college for an explanation of the $750,000, but we've received additional information in recent days. So I think we'll write a second letter to give them, to summarising the points made, and ask them to deal with these points, that we will get a response to the points being raised in this correspondence, that as a result of us highlighting the issue last week. So can we agree to allow the Secretariat to proceed summarising those letters with the main points? So we note, and that's agreed.
Can I just ask?
And if people wish, when the letter goes to the College in Maynooth, we'll circulate a copy of the letter we issued to members of the committee. So you'll be up to speed on it if it arises.
Yeah, would this normally have been obvious in the accounts? Would you have expected to?
The governing authority decided in the context of the 2017-2018 financial statements, having examined the business of the subsidiary, they decided that it was unlikely that they would have the loans returned in full, and so they made a provision. The subsidiary, as I understand it, was established only in February 2016, so it really has not been up and running very long. It was anticipated that it would be trading, that it would take some time before it came into a profit or a surplus-making situation. It's fully consolidated into the university financial statements anyway, so the outgoing has been, if you like, already taken and presented on the consolidated side. It's really only a question of the position as between the university and the subsidiary. I understand, as the Chair has said, that you've written to the university, and it's really for them to provide more detail in relation to it. Because I haven't presented a report on it, I drew attention to it, and I'm constrained really in anything more I can say about it at this stage.
So well, the onus is on the college to deal with this issue in the first instance. So we've written to them, and we're going to send a further correspondence to them, supplementing the earlier correspondence, and we'll ask them to respond to all the issues raised when they come to reply, and we'll circulate the letter we're going to issue to members of the committee, because some members...
In the normal course of event, the other issue that's raised, 800 employees on zero-hour contracts. A lot of them tutors. I think it's quite shocking, actually, that there's such precarious employment. Is that something that would become obvious, or is in a set of accounts that it's?
No. You wouldn't normally expect to have information around employment practices at that level of detail. I mean, certainly my understanding from the documents that have been provided is that it's talking about part-time, casual kind of employment. But these are people who would be maybe hired to tutor for a couple of hours a week, or it may be on an episodic basis. There may be other colleges where similar practice arises. There was a number of years ago a concern around contracts of indefinite duration, where people were being hired, usually in the research side, on contracts for specific research projects. But I think that position was regularised as a result of, I think it was 2013 legislation, or was it 2003? I just can't recall offhand. But there is legislation that has resulted in a number of employees of third-level colleges being given contracts, permanent contracts, with the entitlements that come with that.
And that is that matter is referred to in the correspondence we received, so it will be in the letter we write to the college, that issue of the part-time staff.
I've got my glasses.
Pardon?
I forgot my glasses.
Oh, yeah, sorry, that's okay. So I'm doing my best to cover the item. So next item of correspondence is 2300 from an individual. He's calling it the broadband farce, and that's the individual's view. So I propose we send them a copy of a 6th periodic report where we made our recommendations in relation to broadband. That's agreed. Next item, 2302, we'll deal with it in private session. 2303 is from Deputy Catherine Murphy in relation to the properties, embassies and everything like that, owned by the state outside the country, and she had PQs on it. There's 159 of them. Tremendous schedule of detail.
Things in the
PQ.
There's some very curious things that if you compare one year with the other, there may well be very, very good explanations, but they don't. For example, there's a very large amount of money for London. It may well be, but it doesn't look like that was purchased. And I just think we could usefully put this on our work programme, or we're having the Department of Foreign Affairs in, to maybe get some proper explanations as to why there is such variations.
Okay, we'll put it on the work programme, because see, an AGL Vision is report at the end of September, so we'll have that on our work programme next year with the Department of Foreign Affairs. So we'll note and publish that.
Request.
No, you're happy for us to deal with it when the department comes in?
I am, yeah.
That's fine. So that's agreed. Next item is 2304 from the chairman of a group called Renewable Gas Forum, dated the 5th of July, which wants to highlight the provision in the Climate Action Plan regarding the provision for agriculture source biomethane in heat. The matter raises a policy matter, which is a matter for the department. So we've issued a report in relation to climate change, our aspect of it. So this has come to us because there's all the discussion happening here as the Public Accounts Committee. So we'll send this to the department for a response. Now, we mightn't get in, analyse or comment on the response, but we'll just ask for information on that. We may not get, I think it might ultimately be a policy matter, but let's get the information, and if it is a policy matter, we can decide who deals with it at that stage. So next item of correspondence is 2305 from Deputy Kelly, following from the HSE meeting here about the capital plan, I think.
It wasn't the HSE, it was the department.
Fine.
So I asked a whole range of questions, and the Secretary-General made commitments that he would be back to us very quickly with answers. Hasn't happened. Now, you know, obviously a week, 2 weeks, fine, but I want answers before we close. So can you write to him or ring him? Or I mean, like, these are pretty basic questions.
How many weeks ago was that? It's a few weeks, isn't it?
3 weeks ago, I said, was it?
Yeah.
I could be wrong, it could be 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But like, they're pretty basic questions, which he said he'd come back to us straight away, and he hasn't done so. And for me, as somebody who's trying to create a jigsaw here of lots of little pieces in relation to a number of issues, the fact that he hasn't replied is worrying for me. So I'd like direct answers to my questions.
Okay.
Please.
And we will phone them during the course of the day.
Thank you.
If we had asked 20 questions, and they can send back some of the answers now. You don't have to wait until every question is...
I'd say it was a quarter of that now, Chair.
Yeah. So look, we're asking for that response immediately. So we will do that today. Okay, next item then is 2308 from an individual... 2308 from an individual with some comments regarding the recent media coverage in relation to the greyhound industry. I know the Agriculture Committee discussed that at length, but we will definitely have Board Nagan on a work programme in the autumn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now we'll get the annual accounts from the CNAG, and the agriculture vote will be at the end of the...
Chair, I think it's obviously very topical, and I know Deputy Murphy has raised it before and asked for them to be brought in. I support bringing them in. Yeah. Not obviously for the issues within our remit, which is in relation to how they spend their money and their corporate governance and all of that, not obviously in relation to welfare, which is more an agriculture issue.
Okay,
committee.
So we'll put them on the work programme, that's great. And I think there might be just one other item, if members will bear with me for a minute. Yeah, I received this yesterday, and I'll pass it on to the Secretary, a short letter. It's just arrived to me as chairperson, and I don't want to sit on it for the summer. So it's a letter from the Irish Petrol Retailers Association, read the Valuation Office and the Valuation Tribunal. We had a discussion on the Valuation Office here about a week or two ago. So on the 27th of June, we were discussing the Valuation Office. This is from, as I said, the Irish Petrol Retailers Association. They said that they have over 1,000 appeals waiting to be heard now, and service station members have no faith in receiving a fair decision on appeal. This is their view. The Valuation Office is refusing to release any data on the external audits that were carried out in 2017 and 2019 under FOI requests. So I propose at this stage, with your agreement, this can be circulated with normal correspondence, is we ask the valuation for a response to the letter and the Valuation Tribunal. Okay? So I just got that last night. I just don't want to sit on it for the summer, so we can deal with it straight away. Okay, so statements and accounts received from the last meeting. Please do.
Chair, one other issue. A number of weeks ago, we received a reply in relation to companies in CIT. Yeah, I was never happy with it, as you know. So I spent a few weeks trying to dig down into it. I've done a lot of analysis. With the permission of you, Chair, I'd like to put back some questions to the HEA and to CIT I will put them in writing to yourselves, not to take up time here.
Yeah. I'll
put them in writing, and I'd appreciate you forwarding them on, because I actually think the submission that was sent to us doesn't actually deal with the questions we asked. I've drilled down into the companies. I can't find information on some of them. I can't find details in relation to some of the questions I asked. In fact, if anything, it's a small bit of a whitewash, and I want to go back and ask a number of questions. Okay. I'll keep it down to a low number as I can.
Okay, so if the deputy then submits them,
yeah.
we will deal with it.
Appreciate it. I just wanted to put it on the record here.
Yeah, promptly and fairly and as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
So, next item then are the statement of accounts received since the last meeting. They're coming up on the screen there now. So, first item is the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission, expenditure of 134 million, and they're before us now in a few minutes. Second item is Microfinance Ireland, clear audit opinion, a turnover of €539,000. The charities regulator, I'm proposing we'll put that on our work programme for early in the autumn, and their accounts, clear audit opinion, and the charity funds will also include that with our meeting if appropriate. Then we have the National Standards Authority, clear audit opinion, and then we have all the NAM accounts. And the NTMA, the NTMA accounts, all clear audit opinion, but again the NTMA administration accounts, non-compliant procurement, which is highlighted by the CNAG, and the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, weaknesses in internal controls relating to foreign currency hedging, which resulted in a loss of 721,000. So we'll write to the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund on that. But just to formally note, all the different accounts we're talking about is the National Treasury I should have also mentioned the National Standards Authority clear audit opinion. So we want now just to note the National Treasury Management Agency account, the administration account, the National Debt of Ireland account, which then the Post Office Savings Bank Fund, the State Claims Agency, which will be coming back in the autumn, Dormant Accounts Fund, the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, we've just mentioned that, the National Asset Management Agency Investment, DAC.
These are the NAMA subsidiaries.
These are all subsidiaries. National Asset Management, DAC. National Asset Management Group Services, DAC, National Asset Management, DAC, National Asset Property Management, DAC, National Asset Management Services, DAC, National Asset JVA, DAC, it's a special purpose vehicle set up by NAMA, then the National Asset Keys, DAC, and the National Asset Residential Property Services, DAC, and the National Asset Sarasota LCC, all clear audited opinion. So we just note all those, big list there, and we will be having NAM in early, but the CNAG is doing a special report on Project Nance, and we'll wait until we have that in our possession in the autumn, and then we can deal with both issues on the one day. Now, the work programme for the autumn,
I mentioned Caranua, and I think I got an update, and I just forget what the update was.
We'll recirculate it, and if there's current...
we got a date.
It's just that it's coming to a...
Yeah, the 2018 audit hasn't commenced yet. We expect it to be August. So it will be the autumn before we'll have finalised the 2018 position.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, that's fine. So then the next item is the work programme. I just want to make some suggestion, because the way practically this works now is the CNAG's report is out at the end of September, and we'd have to give people at least a week to come in. We might talk to the CNAG close to the time, maybe who we might invite in early October, but there'll probably be 3 meetings, towards the end of September and the beginning of October, before there's a chance to deal with the CNAG's report. So I'm suggesting, in the meantime, pending the CNAG's documents, these are organisations that I think we haven't seen here before at all, or maybe in a long time, and I think it could be very useful. And we'll ask the Secretariat maybe to suggest and arrange the dates at the end of September approximately for, I suggest, the Data Protection Commissioner, and that's a big issue now here in Ireland, data protection, big European responsibilities here. I think we want to check how the Data Protection Commissioner, the governance and arrangements. Also on board Planala haven't been here, I think, in quite a while. People might want to see how board Planala has been operated. The charities regulator hasn't been here in quite a while. There are 3. I've gone through a list myself to try and put on early, because we're not waiting on the CNAG's report and those. And we'd ask them all to have up-to-date financial information. If they haven't their 2018 accounts audited and available to us, that won't look good. So if they're not available, we're still going ahead, but they must provide us draft information or something that we can have a meaningful discussion on the most up-to-date. Even if it was waiting publication or final sign-off, we need up-to-date information. We've already mentioned Board and Gun will be in early. You know, when we get to CNAG's report, we'll see is there anything on it in relation to Board and Gun. And other items that are being on our work programme, they're not specifically listed for a meeting. We've said we're going to come back to the issue of capital projects, procurement, PPPs, and the issue of protected disclosures is hanging around there the whole time across a lot of departments. So I think we'll try and start with Data Protection Commission, Board Connolly, Charities Regulator, those type of people, subject, and NAMA as soon as NAMA are ready with Project NANS to come in as well. And then we'll have the CNAG's report, you know, to move into in early October. We want to let the Secretariat go and make some arrangements over the summer to have meetings arranged for us when we come back. They're just my suggestion, but I've gone through a good list and I think they could be useful group.
Yeah, can I just add, I mean, we all would have a view on Board Connolly for different reasons.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'd be delighted with decisions, sometimes you couldn't understand how to make decisions. But in relation to their finance, I mean, obviously things have changed a little bit because they've strategic applications of the strategic planning, which is slightly different, and probably there's a larger amount of money involved. But it wouldn't strike me as one of the ones that, from a public accounts point of view, you know, screams out unless there's something that's showing up in their accounts.
Well, one of the reasons I picked them is one. I know we won't be getting into planning decisions, that goes, but to receive 17 million of taxpayers' money directly from the state. So I think the 17 million is a big threshold. It's a bigger threshold. The charities regulators receive about 4 million, and
can we just say
that, you know, they do receive state funding.
No, I understand that, but the point I'm probably making, or trying to make, and make it very badly, is, I mean, obviously what throws up in the CNAG report where there's things that are anomalies or things that are, you know, that really need to be interrogated. Really, I mean, they obviously have that's where the first call is. And then there are obviously very big amounts of money that probably don't get the same level of scrutiny sometimes as relatively big amounts of money, but by comparison, small amounts of money. I mean, I'm more inclined to think that we should be maybe going back and looking at the report and making sure that we have covered the areas where there are things that stand out as
okay. I just want to say that.
Chair,
Deputy Kelly.
No, I would actually support you in relation to this. I believe that it's not just, obviously there's a threshold in relation to the volume of spend here, but also there's an issue in relation to, and we can't go outside our remit, but also in relation to how that spend is dealt with. Now, very few people probably here in the committee know that there was a review put into on Board Connolly, which has never been, I don't remember, it has been published, but it's never got any real airtime or been looked at in relation to the way in which it operates, the way in which, and nothing to do with decisions, because we can never go there, and I accept that and I agree with that, but a transparency in relation to how it operates as well. Not in relation to how it comes to its decisions, not in relation to anything to do with that, but just people don't know how it operates. And I think actually we'll be doing the public service by maybe fleshing through how that works and why it has to exist and why it has to operate in the manner in which it does. Also, there's a significant threshold of money here which people need to see how transparently it's spent.
Okay, Deputy, just want to say we've gone through, like we've been very hard-working committee for the last year or two. We've gone through every chapter in the CNAG's report for that. Only one is held over. It's the court services. We just had to postpone it because we brought forward the HSE the other day. So there's only one chapter. We're up to date in every special report the CNAG has issued, bar one, which we'll deal with. Small one on education capital projects, and we'll deal with capital projects. We've systematically went through votes, and last year we picked out groups that hadn't been brought in before. We had the Attorney General, the CNAG was in, the Oireachtas are in today, they were never in before, the CNAG was never in before. We did the Office of the President, Chief State Solicitor's Office. So we've actually done a very comprehensive trial of all the big departments. Now, the only non-departments, big spending issues, and they were here not over a year ago, are the likes of the IDA or Enterprise Ireland or Transport Infrastructure. Now, remember, we can put them on the list. They would be the biggies of the big money spend. But the other ones, I think it's important to let every public body know you are liable to be brought in here at some stage, like the ETVs, if there is a case. You know, I don't think the smaller public bodies should feel will never be brought to the big. I'd like them all to know, always be alert. So that's kind of why the Heritage Council, you know, I've gone through quite an extensive
IDA
list.
and Enterprise Ireland.
Yeah, we had IDA in. We could bring in Enterprise Ireland onto the list if people want.
Certainly.
Yeah, okay, we'll add it to the list. We'll add it to the list. So look, we'll proceed because I really want to give a bit of flexibility. Some of these people might be available in the last 2 weeks of September. But we need, when we come back, to have meetings scheduled because it does take a month for people's diaries and preparation. So that's why I want to give flexibility to the Secretary.
Just a question in relation to the departments and the appropriation accounts. When was the Department of, I don't know, the title of it, Rural and Regional Affairs? Yeah. When was that before us?
When you were discussing the dormant accounts.
Dormant accounts. Is that a long...
The Secretary-General was here within the last 12 months, I think.
Yeah. Just the dormant accounts and this PUBL, there are issues there too in relation to...
Now, are PUBL audited by you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like PUBL is an organisation that pops up everywhere. Yeah. Let's add them to the list.
I'd be happy if you had it.
Yeah. We had the dormant account fund and we did a recommendation, special recommendations on it, but I think PUBL is a name that's popping up all over the place. And they're a public body. So we'll add PUBL to the list. Okay.
PUBL has significant funding from Children and Youth Affairs, social protection, I think, from rural and community. It is a very
significant funding.
Okay, so look, we've thrown out 5 or 6, and we'll work with the Secretary to try and line up what we can. Some of them won't be possible, but we need to have a few on our agenda for when we come back, and then we will go into the CNAG's report and then identify the departments we want to do at that stage. So I think we're just going to go into private session with 1 or 2 quick items of correspondence we want to deal with. So we're now in private. This morning we are meeting with the Houses of the Oireachtas Service in relation to the Appropriation Accounts 2018 for the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission. And we're joined by the following from the Houses of the Oireachtas Service. Peter Finnegan, Secretary-General, Houses of the Oireachtas Service. Michael Earty, Assistant Secretary, Corporate and Members Services Division. Elaine Gunn, Assistant Secretary, Parliamentary Services Division and Clerk Assistant to Dáil Éireann. Melissa English, Assistant Secretary, Chief Parliamentary Legal Advisor, Office of the Parliamentary Legal Advisors. Maureen Devlin, Principal Officer, Finance in the Finance and the Office of the Commissioner and Secretary-General. And seated behind is Margaret Crawley, Principal HR Services, Denise O'Connell, Principal Parliamentary Budget Office, Conor Morrison, Finance Officer, Angela Brannigan, Management Accountant, and Finn Debris, IT Digital Transformation Office. So can I remind members and witnesses and those in the public gallery that all mobile phones are to be switched off. That means putting them onto airplane mode, and merely putting them on silent can still interfere with the recording system. I wish to advise the witnesses that by virtue of 17:1, you probably wrote this, Mr. Finnegan, so I'm going to read it back to you now, right? I wish to advise the witnesses that by virtue of Section 17:1 of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence at committee. If you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. Members of the committee are reminded of the provision of Standing Orders 186 that the committee shall also refrain from inquiring into the merits of a policy or policies of the government or a minister of the government or the merits of objectives of such policies. While we expect witnesses to answer questions asked by the committee clearly and with candour, witnesses can and should expect to be treated fairly and with respect and consideration at all times in accordance accordance with the witness protocol. So we'll start by asking the CNAG, Mr McCarthy, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. As members are, of course, aware, the primary function of the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission is to provide the services necessary to support the functioning of the Houses of the Oireachtas. The Commission operates under the framework established by the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission Act 2003. The Commission's accounts are a cash-based record of receipts and payments compared to the estimates. Funding for the Commission is provided for statutorily every 3 years, with estimates proposed annually to draw a tranche of the 3-year budget. The overall funding approved for 2016 to 2018 amounted to €369 million. By the end of 2018, a total of €363 million had been used. The balance of €6 million is no longer available to the Commission. The Commission's 2018 account recorded gross expenditure of €134.4 million, distributed amongst service areas as indicated in the diagram which is on screen. Pay-related expenses are distributed across a number of the categories and amounted to around 65% of total spending in 2018. Further expenditure related to the operation of the Houses of the Oireachtas in 2018 was borne by some votes and by the Central Fund of the Exchequer. This includes spending by the Office of Public Works on the premises used to accommodate the services, totalling an estimated €11.6 million, parliamentary activities allowances paid to political parties and independent members, totalling €8.6 million, funding for political parties related to their share of the vote in Dáil elections totalling just under €6 million, and pensions and retirement gratuities of retired staff members totalling €4 million. Payments in respect of the pensions of members of the Houses are accounted for in the appropriation account in the form of an annual grant to Kish the Pinchant Hiha an Oireachtas. This amounted to €11.8 million in 2018. A separate account is prepared in relation to the Kishta. Receipts of the Commission in 2018 were just under €2.8 million. This included just under €200,000 remitted to the Commission under an agreement governing the operation of the House's catering and bar services. Those services are accounted for separately from the appropriation account, and a summary of the transactions is included as Note 7.3 to the account. Members will be glad to note that I issued a clear audit report in relation to the 2018 account. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you indeed. And now Mr Finnegan will have your opening statement. And as accounting officer, you're welcome to appear here as your first time as accounting officer for the Houses of the Oireachtas.
Thank you very much. A choirlig agus a choaltaí, fáiltim rih an deis o teachtas córchaiste na gúntas poblí agus carol a scrúdú a dhéanamh chuntas Commission Hithe an Oireachtas don bliain 2010. Is é seo an chéadúr uair I láthair mar ifigach chuntasaíocht Hirvís Hithe an Oireachtas. Chairperson and members, I welcome the opportunity to attend before the Public Accounts Committee to assist in the examination of the accounts of the House of the Oireachtas Commission for 2018. This is my first appearance as accounting officer of the Houses of the Oireachtas, and I'm joined here today by members of my management team sitting alongside me and by some senior colleagues just sitting behind. In this statement, I propose to give a brief overview on the funding allocation and 2018 appropriation account, some key activities during 2018 and beyond, our corporate governance system and our strategic goals for 2019 to 2021. The Commission is funded on a 3-year statutory cycle basis as approved by the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform and paid out of the Central Fund. The 2016 to 2018 allocation was €369 million. The total outturn for this period was €363 million, or 98.5% of the allocated budget. The unspent allocation was €6 million, which was not carried over to the 2019-2021 funding period. The accounts under consideration today relate to 2018, which is the 3rd year of the current Dáil and the final year of our 3-year allocation. The audited accounts of the Commission show that the gross expenditure for the Houses in 2018 was €134.4 million, against an estimate provision of €135.9 million, representing a 1% underspend. Salaries, pensions and allowances accounted for 97.4 million, or 73% of total spend, which can be classified as non-discretionary spending. Interparliamentary activities, broadcasting services, committee expenses, parliamentary printing, legal costs, essential consultancy and administration costs, which include offices, premises, facilities, basic ICT equipment and services, and postal and telecommunications, amounted to 26 million, or 19% of total spend. Again, this is non-discretionary. The remaining spend of 11 million, or 8%, provided for ICT, the library and research service project spends, training and development costs, and this is the discretionary element. I suppose one of the things to kind of note by the committee is that the Commission is now a large organisation, the House of the Oireachtas Service. We have a total payroll now of 2,027 people, and that's catering for salaries, allowances and pensions for members and former members, political staff, MEPs, former MEPs and civil service staff, including some former state industrial employees, office holder and catering staff. On the 31st of December 2018, the Commission employed 564 full-time equivalent staff. That would be 511 civil servants, 17 state industrials and office holder staff, and 36 catering staff. And that was at a cost of 31 million, or 23% of the budget. Now, if I could turn to some of the key activities in 2018 and beyond, which I'd like to draw the committee's attention to. The expenditure for 2018 reflects the considerable changes implemented in the Dáil Reform Programme agreed in response to the needs of the Houses and members. These include the establishment of the Parliamentary Budget Office, the development of the Office of the Parliamentary Legal Advisor to include drafting and advisory services for members on private members' bills, the increase in the number of committees, parliamentary committees, from 15 to 28 in total, including 8 specialist committees to date during this Dáil term, the extension of service by the Library and Research, Rannog and Astracan, the Debates Office and House Services. It also includes the establishment of the Business Committee, which, as members will be aware, has become a very important part of the running of the Houses. And finally, parliamentary reform also entails some certain incidental and ancillary costs, so arising from sitting hours and security arrangements, etc. Now, I suppose one of the key areas that we have focused on in 2018 has been our ICT investment programme, and the service made a very significant financial investment in new technology and systems in 2018 under its digital transformation programme. This is a key strategic decision for the service, which was taken by the Commission in 2016. So we have made investment in our key business process systems, our in-house ICT expertise, and we have mapped over 1,000 business processes. We're now developing a parliamentary procedural system, and this is being delivered on a phased basis. Some other notable outputs from our digital transformation programme include the upgrading of the Wi-Fi system across Oireachtas buildings, a new website to facilitate greater public engagement, the rollout of Microsoft Outlook, which replaces Lotus Notes, which was the email system for many, many years in the Oireachtas. We've also upgraded the chambers, including committee rooms, adding in simultaneous translation, which will allow us to host meetings conducted in Irish in any of the 4 committee rooms. The Commission will continue with its investment in digital technology in the coming years to advance the modernisation of the processes and systems. I suppose another major feature of the spend in 2018 was the Leinster House restoration project, which is coming to an end. This involved the essential restoration and structural works to Leinster House and was managed by the OPW on behalf of the Commission. I'm very pleased to be able to report that the sittings of the Houses and their committees continued uninterrupted during this work, and the work will be completed in time for the return of the Houses after the summer recess. Absolutely. Okay, just to update on that point, the OPW briefed the Commission on Tuesday, and the handover of the building takes place on the 2nd of August. Okay. so all is on track. Another notable feature of the spend in 2018 was expenditure on legal proceedings. During 2018, the O'Brien and Kearns Supreme Court cases were managed by the Office of the Parliamentary Legal Advisers. The judgments were delivered in 2019. Liabilities arising from the Kearns case remain to be quantified and should fall due for payment during the current 3-year funding allocation period 2019 to 2021. Now, I suppose a major feature of what we've been doing in the Oireachtas over the last 3 years has been our public engagement programme. When the Ceann Comhairle took up his position, he spoke about a Parliament of the people, and we have pursued that over the last 3 years. Part of that involves the Votall 100 commemorations during 2018, which provided the opportunity to increase public understanding and improve perception of the Oireachtas, and particularly the role of women in our national Parliament. The programme of events reflected very positively on the Oireachtas and on the service and provided an appropriate platform for the Dáil 100 programme, which is ongoing. In addition, our public engagement programme included a significant parliamentary education programme, which is delivered by our Education Officer, Connolly, and this has been significantly strengthened since Connor's arrival in the Oireachtas. In 2018, we also published a new policy on dignity and respect. The parliamentary community, which comprises members and their staff and civil servants and service providers, have signed up to the Dignity and Respect Statement of Principles and Policies, which were developed over the course of the last year. If I can turn now briefly to the corporate governance. The Service's main policies and procedures for corporate governance are outlined in its governance framework. This includes the assurance framework, which sets out the key sources of assurance, both internal and external, that underpin the Service's governance arrangements and activities. A review of the Service's Management Committee was completed in 2018. A new structure of Management Board and Strategic Committees evolved that focuses on providing strategic direction to oversee and account for the performance of the Service through collective leadership. The Board reviewed the Service's risk and corporate governance controls. We are now in the process of further professionalising our governance functions to include a Chief Risk Officer, a Chief Financial Officer and a qualified internal auditor. Our new Chief Financial Officer is due to start at the beginning of September. The Commission's Audit Committee advises me on financial matters relating to my functions and advises the Commission on matters of corporate governance relating to its functions, and its reports are published in the Commission's annual report. For the next 3 years, from up to 2021, the budget allocated for the running of the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission is 422.3 million. The Commission adopted its strategic plan last Tuesday and has identified 4 key strategic goals for itself. These are the development of an effective Parliament, an open and engaged Parliament, a digital Parliament and a well-supported parliamentary community. In conclusion, I'd like to acknowledge the support and assistance provided by the Ceann Comhairle, the Cathaoirleach and members of the House of the Oireachtas Commission. My colleagues and I in the House of the Oireachtas Service take immense pride in serving our national Parliament and its members, and we look forward to contributing to its development during the period 2019 to 2021. That concludes my statement, and I'm now happy to take any questions that members of the committee may have.
Thank you indeed, Mr Finnegan, for your opening statement. And the lead speaker for today's meeting is Deputy Alan Farrell, who has 20 minutes, and second speaker has 15, and all other members have 10, and members have indicated in the following sequence: Deputy Alan Farrell, Jonathan O'Brien, David Cullinane and Shane Cassells. For now, Deputy Connolly and Deputy Murphy. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, and thanks very much for coming in. You're very welcome. I'll start by complimenting you all. Probably not a surprise, but I'll compliment you in relation to the centenary celebrations, the ones that have applied to the Oireachtas, because I think they've been exceptionally well performed or pulled off, or whatever you want to call it. In particular, the Dáil 100 event, some of which I'm sure, in terms of the finances of the Commission, was expended in 2018. I have to say there have been some really well put together programmes, particularly in terms of public engagement, and I think for the only opportunity I would most likely get to note that is now, so I think it appropriate to do so. Turning to a slightly less important matter, but probably as important for persons who use the bar in this establishment. And there has to be some pun thrown into this debate this morning in relation to rats. And there was a mention of a certain dish being on the menu today, which I'll put out there as you know, to be interesting if the canteen put on ratatouille. But I think equally, but with a slight element of seriousness, I appreciate the building is extremely old, and all the various works that have gone on. It is a concern, of course, to all of those individuals that you've highlighted are on the payroll, including this one, in relation to the expenditure on pest control and things like that. But it is, I have a genuine concern about it, and I'm sure you share it, because of the proximity of all of the services provided by the catering unit and the bar and everything else. So it's not a question, it's just a very badly performed pun on my part. But look, I'll turn to the ICT side of things, because I think it's probably really the only point in the CNAG's report that's worth discussing. Firstly, I'll note that you've come in under budget, and you're quite consistent at that, I believe. Insofar as I read, you were quite significantly under budget in the previous year. I think it was 13 million. This year it's 1 or thereabouts. I'm sorry, I'm going from my memory from yesterday, from reading through all of this. But one of the things that jumped out at me was the provision for certain expenditure programmes and then the actual expenditure, and there being quite a disparity. And in particular, the one that jumped out was ICT. So there was a provision for 14.6 and you expended 22.7. I appreciate there's been an awful lot of work being done. My office, for instance, was reissued with new laptops for the first time since I was elected in 2011. So thank you for that. The software licenses and all of these things. But could you be specific, Mr. Finnegan, about where the overrun came to pass, please?
Yes, I suppose maybe just before I answer that question, thank you very much for your kind words on the commemoration. I'll pass that on to the team. It was a truly team effort, and it was a great privilege to be involved and to be in Leinster House at the time of the centenary of the Dáil. Just on the ICT expenditure, the expenditure has exceeded the budget, but that was due to a conscious decision that was taken by us in the first quarter of 2018. We track our expenditure carefully, and we have our kind of monthly management meetings, and it became apparent to us that we were going to have quite a significant underspend in 2018, which was the last year of our financial cycle. Now, under the funding regulations that apply to us in the Act, we cannot carry that forward to subsequent years. So we felt that the most appropriate thing to do was to, I suppose, invest 8 million further in services and essentially to bring forward expenditure which we had planned in later years, and that's why we did that. I suppose the ICT programme is a really important one for us. The background essentially is that for probably 15 years there was very significant underinvestment in ICT within the houses. I mean, if you look at the stats that are out there, they would say to you that you should be spending in the region of kind of 10% of your annual budget on ICT. We would have hovered around 6 or 7%. And that would have dropped even further during the period of the downturn. So we faced a situation really where our systems were quite old, outdated, and we needed to significantly upgrade them. And I suppose one of the things we're really conscious, I suppose, in terms of the ICT spend, first of all, is our ability to support members, because we have a new generation of members within Leinster House, and 70% of our members here have less than 10 years in Leinster House. All of our members are using kind of modern ICT in terms of their work. We have to be able to support that, particularly with things like mobile devices. I suppose the second big issue is, I suppose, back to kind of what we spoke about earlier, which is the public engagement piece. And we see ICT as a key strategy in terms of our engagement with the public, because it allows us, I suppose, to reach out and also allows the public to reach in. And it's about having, I suppose, it's about having a parliament that is accessible to people, to the Irish people. And that's been a really kind of strong objective for us over the last year, because, I mean, there has been, understandably, there's been criticisms from time to time about the Oireachtas. But our own view really is that unless people experience the Oireachtas, unless they see the work that's being done by members, whether it's being done in committees, it will be impossible to change that perception. And invariably when people come to Leinster, their house, they're impressed. And the type of ICT investment that we're making will allow people to do things that they do anyway on their phone. So if you're going home on the bus in the evening, you're going to check your news, you're going to check things like the weather, you might look up your real-time passenger information for the next bus, but you can also look at what's going on in the Oireachtas. You can look at what's going on in committees, and for me that's very, very important, to be able to showcase the work that's going on in the Oireachtas and to let people form an independent view of that.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I think one of the things that certainly the members will have benefited from, and their staff, would have been the upgrade from Lotus to Outlook. I mean, I can't remember how old Lotus was, or how long it had been in the houses of the Oireachtas. Excuse me, but obviously it was a very clunky system. I can tell you,
say 17, 18 years.
I can tell you, Mr. Finnegan. I can tell you, Mr. Finnegan. I have a long-serving member of staff in my office who's also a long-serving member of the political system. And on some mornings it was an hour waiting for the thing to start up before you could get into it. So. The upgrade was desperately needed. I'll turn to personnel, I'll turn to payroll. I'll be very specific in relation to overpayments. I know it's a problem across all government departments, and I'm sure it's quite commonplace outside of government departments as well. The only question I had to ask you in relation to was there are payment plans in place for a number of overpayments to personnel, bar 6. And I'm wondering whether there has been progress made since the end of 2018, the financial year. So, carried forward January 1st, 2018, 6 did not have recovery arrangements in place, totalling €12,122. Very, very small money, but it's the principle of it. You might enlighten. If you don't have the answer straight away, that's fine, you can come back to it.
Yeah, I suppose just the issue on the total overpayments, there are 27 cases.
Yes.
Those that have fully paid are 9, those that are on a plan are 10, those that are not on a plan are 3, and those that have been written off are 4. So I will check the position regarding the 3 that are not on the plan.
Yeah. No, as I said, it's just a point of principle.
Yeah. No, it's something that the Commission is extremely conscious of.
Yeah.
And where overpayments arise, it's obviously difficult for the individual concerned, but we try and put in place an appropriate repayment schedule for them and work with them.
Okay. Now. Personnel of another type, secretarial allowances, secretarial overspends in relation to assistance for non-office holders of the Dole and the Shannon. There's significant sums there, and I'm kind of confused about it because, over time, I'd say over time it's fairly consistent, or I would have thought it would have been fairly consistent in relation to those employment categories. At certain times of year, looking back at previous years, you could probably extrapolate the sort of expenditure that you can expect in any given year, but cumulatively 1.5, give or take 6 million is a lot. And I'm wondering, it was stated in the report that the estimate was in relation to pay increments and overtime. So secretarial, obviously they're on a scale, so it's fairly easy to predict, I would have thought. So could you enlighten us as to why that prediction wasn't made?
It is reasonably easy to predict, correct. What happened there was that during the downturn, the overtime for secretarial assistants was reduced. Many of them qualify for payment based on 6 hours overtime. They did for 6 hours overtime per week. The maximum, maximum, based on our information is that they work far in excess of that, a lot of those people.
Indeed.
The Commission took a decision based on negotiations with the staff associations for the people concerned to restore that back up to the 8 hours. And that's the reason for that spend.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it is actually specific to that 2 hour agreement. Okay, fair enough. Just in relation to, again, I'll tread carefully here.
Could I just make just one additional point, if I may, just on
Please
that? In the course of kind of dealing with that issue, we analysed kind of the number of people that were working those type of hours, and roughly it's about 2/3 of secretary assistants are working at least 8 hours overtime a week, which is a lot. They're really, I suppose, they're a hard-working group of people, and it's the nature of the job.
Yes, absolutely.
And they're required to be flexible.
Well, yeah, I can only say on behalf of my own staff, I mean, certainly when I'm working, when I'm in the Dáil, they're here.
Yeah, it's very much linked on.
So,
it is, yeah.
I'll move to something that's slightly more concerning, related to something that was referenced in the 2017 accounts. There was an allegation of fraud made in relation to salary increments over a period of 18 months. That was to be classified as either something for the Gardaí to pursue or not. And I wonder if there's any further update on that. And then in relation to the theme of that particular allegation, as to whether there will be, I'm going to operate on the assumption, Mr. Finnegan, that you've put in place a more robust arrangement to ensure that increments are carefully reviewed.
Because the matter is under investigation,
it's still under
I can't really comment on it. What I can speak about is kind of the response on our side in terms of controls. Following the issue, we did a detailed examination of it, and we now have a series, another 6 or 7 additional controls in place, which now basically apply to that system of incremental credit. And these have been obviously agreed with the relevant associations concerned, and I'm satisfied now that we have the appropriate controls in place to avoid a recurrence of that.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Just touching upon expenditure, unusually an expenditure programme which was nil, which is the North-South Interparliamentary Association. It was only 51,000 set aside, nothing was spent. Is that the fact that the Stormont Assembly is not?
It is, yeah.
It is. Okay, so
I think it's one of the great tragedies of the fact that the Assembly isn't functioning at the moment, that
Absolutely.
Association, which had really begun to find its feet, isn't functioning at the moment. And I know the Ceann Comhairle is very anxious to, I suppose, keep the North-South links alive, and he has taken a number of initiatives. He contacts regularly with the Speaker of the Stormont Assembly, Speaker Robin Newton, and he also had a talk in the Members' Restaurant in May, which was on Edward Carson, and that was to reciprocate a talk that took place in the Assembly in January to commemorate the first Dáil. So we would hope that the North-South Interparliamentary Assembly will be back up and running once Stormont is up and running.
Well, yes, and just on the theme of interparliamentary associations and communications with other parliaments, and I think it's an integral part of what we do, just in terms of our ability to learn from what others are doing. I'm the head of the delegation for the OSCE, for instance. I'm also involved in the Parliamentary Friendship Group, which I think are, I'd compliment the Ceann Comhairle and yourself, Mr. Finnegan, in relation to the supports that are provided there. Because, we can't sit in these offices and learn about the world. Sometimes you have to physically be there. And it is very beneficial, and I know a lot of members engage in that process, so the supports that are provided are appreciated.
Thank you.
Just in relation to the obvious impacts that the Kerins and O'Brien cases will have, my only real question, Mr. Chairman, is in relation to provision for future expected liability that will befall the houses of the Oireachtas or the Commission, as to whether from an accounting perspective you are ensuring that there are adequate provisions for that in future budgets or in the budget for this year or next year, whatever it might be. And is it possible for the Oireachtas to actually quantify that as of yet? I know it's mentioned in your accounts that it isn't, but
no, it's not possible to quantify it. We have made some provision in our accounts for obvious reasons. I won't say what that provision is.
Yes.
But it's not possible to quantify it.
Okay. Just in relation to, I'll just go back to ICT for a second. In relation to contractors that are used by the Oireachtas, is it your opinion that the service provided by those contractors in the support of the ICT unit represents value for money?
It is, yes. We did a review of that recently, our managed IT service. That review kind of demonstrated that there was value for money. It brought forward recommendations in terms of how we might kind of approach the service next time round. But I feel overall it is a good service. The feedback from members on the technical support, it's Fujitsu Siemens or the company concerned, is very positive, and they provide a good service nationwide to members.
Yes, I can't fault them, to be quite frank. Just in relation to the upgrade of Leinster House, all of the work that's been done over the last year or so, and I know it's been managed by the OPW. Did the House of the Oireachtas, or did the Commission incur cost, or was it incurred by the OPW in relation to the movement of the Shannon Chamber into the National?
The Commission incurred some costs, yeah, in relation to the move to the Shannon Chamber. There was, I suppose, one of the big costs that was incurred in relation to that would have been in around the arrangement that was made between the House of the Oireachtas and the National Museum. And in return for facilitating the Shannon, we agreed to provide funding towards the provision of a lift within the National Museum. And we transferred that amount. It was 500,000 at the end of last year, and that will be used now in terms of the capital programme for the museum.
But otherwise there wasn't a rent paid
some
per
other
se.
additional costs were related to security, which we picked up as well, because there were costs that were directly arising from our occupancy of the ceramic room.
Is that in relation to securing the doors and things like that? Or?
Yeah, it would be securing the doors.
As opposed to personnel?
Yeah.
Okay.
On the museum side, yeah.
Physical things. Yeah, well, that's hard, not surprising, I suppose. Oh yes. The last two things then, Chairman, is firstly to compliment the houses on the work that they've done in the establishment of the PBO and the legal services that are being provided. I think it's important to note that. There was a time back in 2011 when I started drafting up a bill, and it was only through assistance from the Library and Research Unit that I was able to, which I believe was beyond the normal scope, that I was actually able to put a piece of legislation together, a bill. And I thought that was very strange. I was brand new in the building. I thought it was very odd that there was no direct support, and I had to go off to the Law Library to get additional assistance. But it's different now, and that should be noted, and I should compliment on it, particularly the Parliamentary Budget Office and the reports that they issue, the periodic reports that they issue, because they are extremely helpful. And again, without the normal opportunity to raise these things, I'll use this opportunity to do so. But as you've been given a clear audit, Mr. Finnegan, and there isn't really anything of major significance there that jumped out of the page, I'm very pleased with the CNAG's report, and thank you very much for appearing this morning.
Thank you, Deputy.
Okay, thank you indeed, Mr. Deputy Farrell. And the next speaker is Deputy David Cullinane.
Gormagat, welcome to yourself, Mr. Finnegan, and all of your team. You're happy to be here. I'm assuming you're happy to be here, and we're happy to have you.
Look, it's an important part of my function.
Very good.
The Public Accounts Committee.
Can I start with the accounts, page 12? You touched on some of this in your opening statement, but just maybe to expand on it.
Yeah.
Line item E, I think, under administration, office equipment and external IT services.
Yes.
The 2018 estimate was 14.6 million, is that right?
14.6, yeah.
And the outturn was 22.7 million.
Yeah.
so an increase of 9.7 million. First of all, what was done? What was that 22 million for? And why was there an increase of 9.7 million?
I suppose to answer your last question first, the increase of 9.7 resulted from a strategic decision that we did because there was funding available in the final year of our 3-year budgetary cycle, and the service basically recommended to the Commission that we bring forward ICT expenditure, so hence the reason the extra 8 million was invested in ICT.
Was that decision made then before the estimate of 14.6 million was put in? So was it made? At what point was that estimate made, and at what point was the decision made to increase expenditure?
The estimate would have been the year before. The estimate would go through typically in October of the preceding year.
Which would have been 17, is it?
17, correct, yeah.
And at what point then was it decided to expand?
It was in the first quarter of 2018, because when we're profiling our spend, it became evident very early on that, particularly on the salary side, that we weren't going to hit the numbers that we had originally envisaged. So we took the strategic decision then to invest money then in ICT.
And specifically for?
It was in a number of areas. I suppose it was in project expenditure relating to digital transformation, our digital Parliament programme. We basically purchased our new Microsoft licences, which account for almost 2 million, 1.9 million approximately. And then we purchased hardware equipment as well.
And would that be, all of that would be tendered for? Or is that
absolutely, yeah.
And
absolutely.
Can we get a breakdown of what that 22.7 million was spent on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Line item.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of the programme itself, the programme came in at 11.36 million. Software maintenance, which would include things like kind of licenses, Microsoft licenses, that came in at roughly 2.6 million. Our managed service support with Fujitsu was 1.37 million. Printing equipment, we replaced our printer in the print unit, came in at approximately 1.3 million. Hardware was approximately 864,000. Our sound contract came in at 678,000. That would be the sound contract in the Dáil, the Shannon and the 4 committee rooms. Our network expansion, which would be our Wi-Fi and so forth, came in at 618,000. And then I suppose the final kind of items within that overall figure of 22.17 would be things like consumables and stationery for the Oireachtas, cost of our website, servers and backup units, our managed print service, office equipment, and some kind of minor miscellaneous costs.
Okay, you might provide the committee, if you can, with just a detailed note, because obviously I don't have a quarrel with a decision being made to upgrade the systems and where it needs to be done from an ICT perspective. It should, but when there is, because I'm looking at the outturn for most of the headings, it's either under budget or on budget. So this is one of the ones that jumps out, where it's a significant overspend. So if we could have a detailed note of what exactly the breakdown of what exactly the money was spent on, that would be useful for us. And on page 19 of the report, where it talks about variations in expenditure, it deals somewhat, but it's only a paragraph, so we can't really get under the bonnet of exactly what it's all spent on unless we obviously ask questions or get a more detailed note. But under office equipment and external IT services, office premises expenses, it says the overspend here arose due to additional costs incurred in relation to the relocation of the Shannon to the National History Museum. What was the cost overrun there on that project?
The overrun there is 194, but that would be attributable to
that 194,000.
194,000.
And what was the total cost of that project?
The OPW, the move to the National Museum, I think, was probably in around $1 million for the refurbishment of that.
And why was there an overspend of 194,000?
That is actually the cost that we would have picked up in relation to that. The other cost would be met from the OPW.
Yeah, but it's an overspend. Like I'm reading it here, it says the overspend arose due to additional costs. Was that because the additional costs were not foreseen?
They were not foreseen, no, correct, yeah. There was an
and why was that?
Because we had to upgrade the alarm system when the Shannon was moved over to the National Museum.
Okay. Okay, and then questions in relation to the refurbishment of Leinster House itself and conservation works, and we all look forward to it being completed and opened.
Yeah.
And if there's a grand opening, we'll be all there as well. But it's I just want to look at the costs, and again, I don't believe everything I read in the newspapers, no more than anybody else. But the initial reports on the cost of the project, I have an Irish Times article, May 2017, and it talks about the project costing 8 million. And it says, I quote, "While the final cost of the work has yet to be determined, the OPW last December said it would be at least 8 million. So that was back in May 2017. So at what point would initial costs have been worked out? So is that figure accurate, and was the OPW accurate in saying that it would be at least 8 million? Was that an estimate, or what was that based on?
It would have been an estimate, yeah, but it would have been quite a rough estimate too. I suppose the costs on the refurbishment project, the total project spend, which is your construction fees, your design team fees, VAT, etc., and various bonds, that would come in at 14.87 million. So that's the key figure.
Oh, I know that. That's what we'll get to that in a moment. I'm going backwards first, and we'll work. We'll work to what the actual cost was. But back at that point, a number of newspaper articles were talking about a cost of 8 million. So what you said is there was a very rough estimate by the OPW of 8 million. It would be better if we didn't have rough estimates, because once figures are put out like that, then the problem is then that if it costs more, we're into the cost overspend territory. But I'm looking at, and I downloaded this from the web from a website, but it was Leinster House Restoration and Conservation Works, and this is published by the contractors Duggan Brothers. So it says 12 months, an Office of Public Works, contract value 10 million.
Yeah, no, the contract basically is 12.87 million, and that's inclusive of VAT and the bond.
Might be a VAT difference.
Might be a VAT.
Businesses would tend to
okay, that's what that is then. I might provide a copy of that, and maybe if that could be confirmed, if it was a VAT difference. Was there an overspend, I suppose, to cut to the chase on that work? So what was the estimated cost, and what was the total outturn, or the estimated outturn? So has there been an overspend?
I wouldn't describe it as an overspend in this. It's under negotiations, obviously, between OPW and the builder, but it's in the public domain at the moment that the final project cost will come in roughly around 15% above the figure of 14,878, and that's attributable to the fact that some of the items that result in additional costs could not have been foreseen when the tender documents were being done, because there's only a certain amount of surveying that you can do with a historic building, and it's when you actually get in at it that you know precisely kind of...
I'm reading from an Irish Examiner article, and again, it's just newspaper articles, but if they're wrong, feel free then to correct the figures. But this was on the 8th of July of this year, this week in fact, and it says the total cost of renovating Leinster House, the project will top 17.5 million. Is that incorrect?
17.5. I suppose if you add 15, doing very rough maths, if you add 15% to 15 million, you're roughly about 17 million.
So it's correct.
It's not far off.
So is there an overspend then?
The estimate cost of the overspend is probably of the order of 15%, and that's basically costs that, in respect of itemised work, which are done at the unit costs that are built in the contract.
And okay, so maybe explain to us in a little more detail so people can understand it, because
it's actually things.
Just bear with me for a second. Why is there an overspend in the first instance, and if it's about 15% in monetary terms, how much is that, and what's it directly related to?
I suppose, to answer your first question, the reason there's an overspend was because there's a certain amount of this work that was not known in advance and could not be known in advance until the contractor arrived on site, and certain things were stripped away. In relation to the particular work...
Can you give examples of that?
Yeah, it would be external. It would be kind of brickwork, chimneys, additional fireproofing, addressing some of the voids that were discovered in the structure of the building that weren't actually known when the surveying took place. Like, there was an extensive amount of surveying done to the building beforehand, but it's impossible to catch everything as part of that process, and there will be kind of a number of items that remain undiscovered, you know, right up to the point you move.
And is there no limit then on what it could cost? So in other words,
yeah.
anything could have been found that could have, you know, increased the cost?
I don't think anything could be found. Like, the OPW did a really
well, there was a number of things that were found that were unforeseen or weren't.
Correct,
You said there was very extensive surveys carried out, but then there were still things that just weren't detected that led to an overspend.
Yeah, that's correct. But I suppose the nature of kind of restoration of historic buildings is that there will be things that you discover once you get on site and you look at things in detail. And these were the issues, I suppose, that I've just referred to there, that will give rise to some additional.
Can I just quote something back to you, because I found it an extraordinary quote. I won't name the individual because I don't think he's in the role that he was in. It was the superintendent here of the Houses of the Oireachtas, and it was quoted in the Irish Times when they were asking about the costs. And he said, I quote, "As Michelangelo said to the Pope, it will cost what it will cost." Like, that's not really an appropriate response. This is when somebody's asking genuine questions about how much a project costs.
Yeah.
And can I just put it into the context of all the other cost overruns outside of your control that involve state money? People do take these issues seriously. So when a question is asked and the response is that, as Michelangelo said to the Pope, it will cost what it will cost, is a very flippant response. It almost sounds like, well, whatever it is, it is. But we're talking here about our money, taxpayers' money. Did you see that quote in the first instance?
I did see it at the time,
And do you think it was an appropriate quote?
It's unfortunate to make that comment. I suppose we have been particularly conscious of cost control on this project. We have our own internal team that works on it. That team meets every month. The Commission is getting progress reports from the OPW, and I suppose the management of public money on the project has been a key priority for us, because the House of the Oireachtas of all institutions has to ensure that public money is spent appropriately and there is proper management of resources. Okay, thanks for that. The final question I have, I think it would be remiss of us not to ask questions about our own expenditure and what we incur. So the first question I have in that territory is the funding for political parties. I think it's something that's actually largely misunderstood. And there's an obvious logic to it, that you lessen the dependency on corporate donations, which we have very strict controls on, thankfully, in this state. And I'm personally in favour of state funding for political parties and for groupings and independents. How does it work? So people see, and we have, as we do during this so-called silly season, we'll have any amount of articles on expenses for politicians and how much political parties and independents cost the state, and that's all grand as well, because we all have to be held to account. But sometimes, I suppose, the facts underpinning it are not always put out there. So how does it work, first of all? How are political parties funded, and then what was the total cost to each grouping over in the year 2018? Okay. I suppose maybe just to preface my remarks by just saying, like, it is a very important source of funding, you know, because it really is the funding of your democratic system. It's not administered, obviously, by the Houses of the Oireachtas, but in broad terms, the way it works is that there is a sum of money, I think it's 61,000 for the first 10 members, and it's on a sliding scale. 61,000 for each member, for each member, for the first 10 members. And it's on a sliding scale, and then any party that is in government, their overall funding is reduced by a third, and that money then can be used. And what's the logic for that? Is because they have access to civil servants? Because they have access to services, etc. And sorry, the first 10 members is 64,000 per member, and then from 11 to 30 members it's 51,000, and more than 30 members then it's 25,000. And is that the only funding to parties? Is there other allowances to parties? There's other funding that goes to parties via the Electoral Act as well, based on electoral performance. But just on the party leaders, on the parliamentary activities allowance, it's very tightly drawn up. There's a series of categories that the money can be spent on, and it's fully audited. I'm going to get to that in a second, because I actually want to ask a question about the difference between allowances for
party leaders and TDs and allowances then for independents. I think there were some changes made to that recently, but I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
I think you did give headline figures in your opening statement as to state funding for political parties. Can you just remind us what that was again? What was it? Sorry, it was.
Yeah, sure.
And is that, sorry, Mr. McCarthy, is that because it's not directly related to your work, Mr. Finnegan, or the work of the Commission?
It's not directly related. The money is actually paid from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform to the parties. We don't have an involvement in those payments.
But is it listed in your accounts? Is that way?
It's classified as a net allied service in the way you have in other appropriation accounts. Yes. You see the expenses.
And who's the accounting officer for?
The Department of Finance.
Okay.
Department of Finance.
We might wait for the Department of Finance to come in then.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Next speaker then was Deputy Cassells.
Thanks very much, Chairman. A warm welcome to Peter and all of the team here this morning, and to thank them for their work. I'm going to start, Mr. Finnegan, just in respect of your opening statement on page 4. You noted in your remarks and you referenced the current Supreme Court case, which obviously involved this particular committee and the ramifications of it. Now, additionally, you wrote to us last night, all of the members, and you set out your thoughts in respect of the establishment of a working group that would be looking at this particular Supreme Court case and the need for Oireachtas committees to have clear terms of reference and to remain within them. Now, one of the points that you made in your letter to us last night was the conduct of meetings and the conduct of hearings by the committee as a whole and the supervision of such hearings by the chair. Now, I would ask, in terms of the implementation or the scope of these changes, and effectively who is policing who, because my fear would be in terms of the ethos of the group and how far this group would be prepared to go in terms of the implementation of changes. Now, we saw at recent committee hearings, we've seen the Greyhound board in here who are in receipt of huge public money and the need for proper scrutiny of the expenditure of that public money. We saw in recent committee hearings the Football Association of Ireland and the stonewalling by their witnesses to questions and citing legal cases in that particular week as a defence. Now, in the end, they lost their state funding, but the fear would be that this particular group would go so far in terms of trying to rein in committees that we wouldn't have that proper scrutiny of the public expenditure. And so I would ask, in terms of when you wrote to us last night, your feelings in terms of the ethos of this group and how far this group is prepared to go.
Okay. I suppose maybe just, as an initial kind of remark, in its Supreme Court, in its judgment, the Supreme Court identified 4 particular areas that it recommended that the Oireachtas examine in order to safeguard constitutional rights. So they were kind of remit the invitations in terms of clarity around invitations, the conduct of meetings, and also remedies. Now, following the issuing of the Supreme Court judgment, the Committee on Procedure and Privileges of the Dáil met and established a working group which reports into it. That working group is chaired by Elaine Gunn, who is just here on my left. And the purpose of the working group, I suppose, first of all, is to consult with all relevant parties within the Oireachtas and outside of the Oireachtas. So the group has kind of written to all of the party leaders. My letter last night was to kind of alert kind of individual members to the work of the group. And a key part of the group's work will be to take to undertake a broadly based consultation of all of the stakeholders involved. Having done that, then it will kind of take the views of people within the Oireachtas, people who come before Oireachtas committees. It will do its analysis, it will take its advice, and it will report to the Committee on Procedure of the Dáil, and the Seanad Committee on Procedure will also be involved in the process. Now, any decisions in relation to the matters concerned are a matter for the Committees and Procedures of both Houses. But I think right across the Oireachtas, people are acutely aware of the need to find the correct balance. You know, people have spoken about the issue of a kind of a chilling effect on Oireachtas committees, and that's not what this is about. This is about kind of addressing issues that have been highlighted to us by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has essentially said to the Oireachtas that it has a wide margin of appreciation in how it conducts its affairs, but it must safeguard the constitutional rights of third parties. And that's what this is about. It's finding that balance, working with people that sit on committees, working with people that come into committees.
So you don't believe that the ethos of that group, as you said, will be that chilling effect of committees to neuter the scope of the questions asked?
Absolutely not. No, that's not what's intended at all.
In terms of and you've alluded to it, and you don't have a final figure, but in terms of the legal costs of that particular case thus far, do you have a figure on that?
Yeah, the figure is, I think it's 485,000 for the two cases. That would be the Dennis O'Brien case and the Angela Kearns case.
What would the normal legal costs be of a normal year incurred by the Houses?
They would be far below that. These are major constitutional cases that required very senior legal teams. Just to kind of explain, I suppose, the representation for the Oireachtas in the courts. On the Angela Kearns case, we had two senior counsels, Paul Gallagher and Brian Kennedy. Paul Gallagher is a former Attorney General, and we would have had two juniors. We would have done all of the in-house solicitors' work ourselves in the Office of Parliamentary Legal Advisor, so there was a considerable saving on that. We also had two senior counsels in the Dennis O'Brien case, and that's in recognition of the important constitutional dimension to both of those cases. For normal cases that were involved with normal litigation, it would be nothing like that. But such are the issues at stake that we had to ensure that the position of the Oireachtas was well argued by some of the top legal brains in the country.
Okay. Just in respect of moving to the Leinster House renovation programme, and you've outlined the figures already this morning in terms of the potential final figure, but just you reference areas of overspend that couldn't have been envisaged when the initial scope was done. At every point when additional work was required, is that referenced through your own office? Would you have signed off as well in terms of working with the OPW in respect of that?
We are, in a sense, the client. The OPW is actually acting on our behalf, but we have a steering group that basically oversees the project, which Michael chairs. That group meets on a monthly basis. It was presented with monthly reports, and all of those issues would have come through. We also had our own expert who we brought in to work for us, who gave us a good independent take on what was being done as part of that project. So
you potentially would have anticipated, obviously, additional costs because of the fact that you're going to be dealing with an old building.
You'd have to, yeah.
You probably maybe had a ballpark figure. Do you feel that the 17 million spend on the building represents the value for money in respect of the work?
I do. I suppose, having been in Leinster House for the duration of the work, having walked the site on many occasions, been up on the roof in the basement, seen every part of that building, there was an enormous amount of work involved in that project. It's very, very detailed work. At any given time, there was 80 construction workers on site. Everybody from kind of electricians, stonemasons. It is very, very good value for money. When you think about it, that building was erected, it was built, constructed in 1745. We're coming up to its 275th anniversary next year. To spend 17 million, which has been the only major capital expenditure on that building and restoration, and if you average that out over 275 years, it's outstanding value for money. And I think one of the really nice things about this project is that there will be a building there for the people of Ireland. at the end of this project, and we really want people to come in and see the building for itself, because the work is to an extremely high standard, and it ultimately, we say it's the People's Parliament and it's their building ultimately.
Just on the subhead of consultancy services, and there was a provision of some 3.4 million for consultancy services. Expenditure only amounted to 1.5 million. Can you explain to me why such a large provision was made for consultancy services?
I suppose the variation kind of is mainly attributable to sort of legal advice. We had an original estimate of 2.5 million.
So legal advice would come under the heading of consultancy services?
It does, yeah, it does. That's the way that's the way it's categorised in our vote.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was a big underspend in terms.
And are there any other consultancy services in terms of PR or so forth engaged by the houses?
No, not on PR, because we have our own communications unit, which does all of the internal communications for it. So there would be some consultancy services in terms of kind of ICT. There is procurement services, consultancy services in relation to facilities. There was some spend on communications that would be kind of in around kind of the Dáil 100 programme and Votall 100. There was some spend in relation to the library, on HR and on internal audit.
Okay. Turning to communications and the broadcasting services, can you tell me the full cost of the operation on a yearly basis of Oireachtas TV?
Yeah. The full cost of Oireachtas TV is in the region of about 1.3 million.
Okay.
And that would be over and above the normal day-to-day spend. I suppose essentially in the broadcasting area, probably about 75–80% of the spend would arise anyway, because we're televising the in-house proceedings. On any given day, we have 6 studios going, covering the 2 houses and 4 committee rooms. That feed is fed out to all of the major broadcasters. There's somewhere in the region of 35 people working on it. So the issue, I suppose, with Oireachtas TV is that the content is there anyway, and the additional expenditure really on Oireachtas TV arises from some of the transmission costs that we incur, and also kind of there is a small element for kind of programme making as well.
Within the communications spend, there has been for a number of years a provision for Houses of the Oireachtas on local media as well, both for regional newspapers and for local radio stations as well, whereby proceedings in the chambers were broadcast on local radio on a weekly basis, and so that people, as you cited earlier, you want to make sure that the public engagement in the Parliament is accessible. Every week there used to be a service. Can you tell me the cost of providing that service on a yearly basis?
That's the addition. We get a figure for you. My recollection is that it was somewhere around about 100,000.
100,000.
That's the sort of money.
So obviously a considerably less amount of money than the national spend on Oireachtas TV. That contract has ended, Mr. Finnegan, am I correct?
Correct. Yeah. It came to a natural end, the contract.
Okay.
And, the 2 extensions that were provided for had been availed of.
Okay. Is there going to be a provision made for a new contract in respect of that service for regional papers and for local radio?
The Commission has kind of considered this, and there was meetings. I know the County Corla met with people that benefited from that service some time ago, and listened carefully to the points that they made, which were valid points. It was brought to the Commission then subsequently, and I suppose the Commission has decided now to kind of go a different direction in terms of kind of local media. The issue with the local media service was that it worked for a category of our members. Our estimates are that 27% of members were covered by the previous contracts, and then in terms of the local media platforms, basically only 4 out of 19 local radio stations were covered. So what we're seeking to do now is we're seeking to design a service that I suppose has much broader coverage for members generally, where there's kind of more equal access to the service, and we're also trying to get a nationwide coverage in terms of the local radios, etc., that pick up the service.
I have to say, Chairman, I find it hugely disappointing that service was effectively ended. Made that point to the Ceann Comhairle when he convened those meetings. I think that local radio and newspapers are a huge part of our democracy and allowing people access to what is happening here. And I think that rather than having that contract ended, we should have seen that provision rolled out to the full 19 local radio stations and to the newspapers as well. And I would make that point again to you this morning, that really should be something that should be pursued. And I think that on behalf of members for local media as well, that is under huge pressure in an age where social media, which is not in any way subject to any kind of proper press regulatory mechanisms, is effectively skewing news. And I think that these houses need that local media engagement, and I would put it to you again that I would ask you that you would seek to do that.
Yeah, no, your point is well made. I suppose just to reassure you, just in terms of the local media element of the new strategy, there is a considerable local media element, and that will involve engaging with the local media organisations on a quarterly basis, bringing them to Leinster House at our cost. We will be facilitating meetings with members. We will be allowing radio stations who wish to do so to broadcast from Leinster House. And we will be providing them in terms of training on the web so that they can access a lot of the material, because so much of our material now is online.
Okay. Chairman, just that concludes, but just to thank Mr Finnegan and all of the team for the work that they do, and in particular for the Dáil 100 celebrations at the start of the year as well.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Deputy Cassells. The next speaker now is Deputy Connolly.
agus fáilteóg agus is iontu go bhfuil an inscinne choramíocht tá choramíocht inscinne I gceist aniu so cógáirteachs agus is rud neamhgan á muidne chur ceistena ormhse agus muidne géiste. You're very welcome, and thank you for the effort with the Irish language as well. Got a míle maith in son Beidir an céadú eile by téile Gaeilge le feiceáil agus le cuista in son Oireachtas Tusaí. Agus just ag fannach lei sin, staying with that, just in view of the Commissioner Changa's report today, and I know you wouldn't have had a chance to read it, and I haven't myself, but the headline figures are extraordinary. Out of 21,000 staff, 3% have a competency in Irish. I don't know, Mr Finnegan, if you had a chance to hear it, but they're the headline figures. 550 out of 21,000 would have a competency in Irish. Now, I have to read it myself, but it's 3% or less.
I haven't seen the report, but
given those figures,
doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I suppose, I mean, as you know, from our own side here, we have tried hard to promote the use of Irish around the houses, and we adopted an Irish language strategy there a year ago, and we have been implementing that. Just in terms of our own kind of organisation, we have obviously bilingual staff in Rannog and Astracan who provide translation service. We have bilingual staff in the debates office, and we have individual areas where Irish language skills are required, such as committees.
I suppose, Mr Finnegan, I accept all that, and most of those 550 people are in the Department of the Gaeltacht, are in areas associated specifically with Irish. But I'm just. It's unfair in a sense because the report has just been published, but it would be remiss of me not to mention it. And so it's a huge problem, isn't it?
It is 3%. It is an enormous
So would
problem.
that be something you will re-look at now within your own strategic plan,
we will,
given the starkness of those figures?
Very much so. I mean, I would be interested to have a read of that report later on to see what exactly it has to say. But I suppose it's a very stark reminder of where we're at in the public service in terms of Irish. And we have to do better, you know, because it is our first official language. And I suppose, in our own organisation here, we are trying to do better in terms of the promotion of Irish. You know, by organising Irish language classes. We have Irish language social events. We set up a Learlan at Aylward.
Yeah, just on the Irish language classes, how available are those? How are they free? Are they free?
Yeah.
What's the uptake on them?
The uptake, the uptake for some of them is disappointing, to be frank. We're making the offering. We're trying to encourage people to kind of attend those classes.
So rather than me diverging onto the Irish language just now, I'm raising it. I'd love to come back to you about it because they're stark, and if people aren't taking up the classes, then we need to look at that.
Yes.
Because actually there's an inverse relationship between the amount of empathy and sympathy and delight that people have in the Irish language and the rate of its decline.
Yeah.
So we really have a serious challenge. So I'm going to park that for the moment and maybe come back to it. I just, in relation to the rats, I take comfort from the fact that they haven't deserted. So this ship isn't sinking yet. So it looks like we might be back, and there's no election looming. Okay. Yeah. So I go straight into just the accounts, and you dealt in relation to the. Let me look at the fraud first.
Yes.
Okay, page 4. And you acknowledge I disclosed an alleged fraud in note 6.2. Okay, and you can't really say much about it. When did it come to your attention?
It was brought to our attention. I'd have to look up the precise date.
Well, just roughly. I don't mind the date.
The summer, I think, the summer of 2018, I think.
So it was last year sometime?
I think it was last year.
Okay.
Sorry, just let me just check now, sorry.
2018. Mid-2018.
Yeah, summer 2018.
Summer 2018.
Yeah.
And it's with the guards. How long was it with the guards?
It was reported almost immediately.
Immediately?
Yeah.
Okay, and you've no update on that from the guards?
No, I don't.
Okay, so that's with
it's a matter of guards.
It's okay. And then you've put in new controls, and we hear this all the time.
Yep.
Something after the event, the controls go in, and you mentioned 6, I think, new items, did you?
Yeah.
Why weren't they in place there before this? Why weren't they in place beforehand? I welcome that you've put them in place now, but week after week we hear this. After the event, something is put in place.
Yeah. I suppose the incremental credit scheme is a scheme that has been in place for a good number of years, and it has operated well up to now.
So there was no red alert from you anywhere?
There was no red alert coming through on our side, and I suppose the issue was that the members in question basically were not who were the employers, were not required to sign the application form, and we have now, that's one of the new controls that we have actually.
And what are the other controls?
Pardon?
What are the other controls?
The other controls basically are that the member, again, who's the employer, has to verify all of the references, and that's that's recognised by the signing of the application. Yeah. The signature basically from the employer also ensures that our members' HR is aware that the application is in process, and then on receipt of the signed application, our members' HR send an email to the employer. So essentially there's a kind of a double lock system confirming that an application has been received, and then after the application has been confirmed or denied, members' HR again contact the employer by email informing them of the outcome.
Okay. So they're now in place. So you would hope there wouldn't be another example, another incident.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. On page 3, if we look up at audits, and it's to do with the bar.
Yes.
And currently closed. Yeah. The staff are paid not. It's an unusual situation, isn't it, here, that the staff are paid by the state?
They're paid, yeah. They're accounted for under subhead 1A.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
and so if we take out the staff payment, it looks like it's operating at a profit.
It does, yeah.
But if you put in the staff costs, it's operating at a huge loss.
But it's correct, but it's a significant. There's a significant cost in running it, but that cost is actually noted at the bottom of the account.
Yes.
Just if I bring it to
so
you.
So is that just historical, the way this has run for years?
It's historical, yeah. And
there's never been. Go
ahead. Yeah. If you look at page 28 of the account, those costs are highlighted there in notes 1 to the account. But I should say, just in relation to those costs, that because of the nature of Leinster House and the demands that it imposes on people, there is a requirement, I suppose, for a facility like this, and it'd be what many employers would provide to people.
their staff.
Okay. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of that, but I'm more looking at the control mechanisms that are in place. And there on page 3, we see a number of points highlighted, 6 points. And there's a credit policy implemented now, an automatic credit and debit deductions. But the next 2 points are particularly important. An internal audit was carried out in 18, giving a reasonable level of assurance. One begs the question, was that after a drink or two? A reasonable level of assurance. What does that mean? A reasonable level of assurance. Which, is that good? Is it?
That's good.
That's fine. That takes that away. So
you can't get absolute assurance.
So that's as good as it gets.
It's reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So the next
we tend to understate things.
Okay, very good. So the next one then is the financial results of the bar and restaurant. The Commission has procured the services of an external auditing firm to carry out a financial audit of the bar and the restaurant.
Yes.
Has that been done?
It has, yes. And that audit was completed, and that audit was presented to the Controller and Auditor General for consideration in the course of his annual audit.
Very good. Where's that at? That's
it's finished. The results are represented in the accounts of the...
And did any issues arise in relation to that external audit?
No. Didn't. No.
Okay. So now I'm going on to the Mr. O'Brien and Ms. Kearns and the 2 cases. And I'm glad that you said this chilling effect, because I'm really tired of this phrase being used. I read the judgments, I listened to Melissa English in relation to her briefings, and certainly the Supreme Court judgment, the purpose, when I read it, and certainly from the briefings, it is anything but a chilling effect on the way we run our committees. I think we want to get that message out. That is not the message from the Supreme Court. And I would like to hear perhaps from Ms. English in relation to the key points again. I think it would be very helpful, very educational for all of us to hear, because the wrong message is going out, perhaps for reasons that suits the people that are putting out that message.
Yep.
Okay. So just on that, you can't tell us the cost, the contingency cost, or what you've put aside. No. I understand that. But in relation to the Mr. O'Brien case, we won that case, didn't we? In the High Court and the Supreme Court.
We won it in the Supreme Court, both in the High and the Supreme. Yeah.
Okay, so perhaps you might give us a note through the Chair on why we're paying costs there when we won those cases.
No, the Supreme Court, the issue of costs arose, and the Supreme Court decided that we would get our costs for the High Court part of the action, and that each side would carry its court for the Supreme Court element. So can you give us a breakdown, Mr. Finnegan, of those costs through the Chair? I would be very happy to do that, yes. Okay. And then the most important thing for me here, before Ms. English comes in, is in relation to how we prevent this happening in the future. And that's what you're talking about in relation to your working committee, how appropriate mechanisms are put in place. Because at the end of the day, that's what was lacking. With the appropriate mechanism for dealing with, and it wasn't this particular committee, it was the previous committee, when they acted outside of their remit, and when they went beyond the invitation that was given to them, there was no existing mechanism, as it were, to put manners on them, for the want of a better phrase. But that's right. That was the determination of the Supreme Court by acting unlawfully. And
lovely. In those particular circumstances, for that particular meeting, for that particular committee at that time, the message is not a chilling effect to tell us to stop asking robust questions. Quite the opposite. And the court is saying we will not interfere with committees if the mechanism is in place. And we only do so when we're forced into it, when there's a lack.
Yeah.
So I just want to get that message out, and perhaps Ms. English might perhaps put it a little bit more articulately for me in relation to the message from the Supreme Court.
Well, Deputy, the only set of papers that I appear not to have brought with me for today, but that's absolutely fine since we've done this briefing on a number of occasions. So, as you rightly point out, there have been messages out there about this chilling effect on parliamentary committees, which is absolutely incorrect. Yeah. The court is at pains throughout the decisions in both the Supreme Court judgments in Kearns to say, as our Secretary-General said earlier, what the court is asking Parliament to do is to set up a system that rebalances non-members' rights when they come in and appear in front of committees. The court is saying, if you put your procedures in place to give an avenue of redress for somebody who feels they have been unfairly treated in front of a committee, if you put a system in place and attach remedies for when a member or a committee acts unlawfully, well then you will have rebalanced
the rights that you need to give to non-members. And what the court is saying is, once you have that system in place, the judiciary and the courts will be giving Parliament a very wide margin of appreciation as to how you run your business. And so it is far from a chilling effect, because a number of errors occurred, as you rightly pointed out, Deputy, in that particular case, in terms of remit, in terms of the letter of invitation, and in terms of how the hearings actually ran. And we would hope that once that system is now in place going forward, once the working group has finished its consultations and reported back to the committees on procedure, and the standing orders are hopefully amended to allow for that redress system, that things will then operate much more smoothly going forward.
What I was trying to do was actually give you the briefing document, but my own notes, the briefing document you gave us, that's all I was trying to do. Yeah. With my own notes, perhaps it's inappropriate, but it's your own briefing document that you gave us in relation to the 4 points. So, yeah. But I think you've been crystal clear, and I think it's been very helpful for the chairs, because there's a certain hysteria going around, particularly in relation to some chairs and their interpretation and the pressure that they're being put on from the press. So I think, and it might be helpful to do that on a more regular basis. Okay. I wanted to start out by thanking, actually, you've set out the functions of the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission and to make the Parliament more accessible. I think that's very welcome. Mind you, it did occur to me what key performance indicators, to use the jargon that we've learned from the Controller and Auditor General in relation to making the Parliament more effective. Money messages come to mind, but we'll leave that for another day. But in relation to make it more effective and open, I welcome that. The Oireachtas TV was an eye-opener for me, the amount of people that actually look at it. I think we're empowering people. I think it's money well spent, and they can see for themselves. They're not reliant on social media. They're learning directly. I think that's very important. I want to thank the staff on the ground, and I think perhaps if the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission was to learn anything, and I'm going to go into cases then and finish with that, the legal cases. If you were to learn anything going forward, is to learn from the staff on the ground. And when I leave here, my abiding memory will be of the ushers on the ground, I have to tell you. And any visitor I've ever brought up here, it's the ushers and the staff in the restaurants who sell the dole to the people and to us, and who made us comfortable from day one, in addition to yourselves. In addition to yourselves. But it is from the bottom up. And I think if you were to learn anything going forward to avoid misunderstandings, to avoid cases, is to listen to people on the ground and have a mechanism for reporting back what are the issues, what's happening, how can we improve the situation. So with that comment, I'm going to go into the compensation, the cases. Let me just look. Legal cases. Yep. And there's an extraordinary price here in terms of clock. So note 6. Yep. Page 25.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe you can do a little bit of explaining here in relation to this. Claims by employees 6, members of the public 3, legal costs 547, over $500,000, legal costs award nothing. Okay, a little bit of clarification around this. Yeah.
Yes, maybe just before I clarify, there's just one thing I just want to bring to your attention. Late last night we discovered that there was a cost included in that figure of 62,000, which is claims by employees, that actually should have been in the figure below, and that was the costs that arose in the case of the Rannog and Astragon and the non-translation of acts. So the claims by employees, the legal costs, are actually around 10,000. My apologies for that.
So it should only be, the claims by employees should be 10,000?
10,000, yeah, okay. yeah. The overall figure is correct, but the breakdown was incorrect, because approximately 50,000 was included in the figure above, where it should have been in the figure below. So just on the claims by employees then, these would be typically HR related claims that people exercise their rights under relevant circulars, and sometimes cases end up in the Workplace Relations Commission, and they would be for representation of the House of the Oireachtas Service.
So I'm sure you can't go into the details of them, but there are 6 cases for employees. So what's the range of issues there that are arising?
I'd have to just get you kind of a note on it, but just from recollection, there can be issues in around kind of competitions, where people were unsuccessful in competitions. There's a penalisation case, an alleged penalisation case.
So maybe you come back again with a note on the range of cases.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and
Yeah.
the same in relation to the public. And then compensation awarded, nothing. What does that mean? Or is that it's still pending, or where are we at with that? Who can clarify that?
Basically, we cover our own legal fees, right? We don't obviously look for legal fees if we're successful in those type of cases, because it would be punitive. On
So,
the people
are you saying in these cases you were successful, so there was no compensation?
Correct. Yeah.
None.
None. Yeah.
Are any of them ongoing? So that's the 18 figures.
The 18 figures. Yeah.
So there'd be cases.
Are they 6 cases settled? Yeah.
Settled.
Settled. Yeah.
So can you give us a detailed note on those cases, as much as you can?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Obviously, we don't need personal details, but I do want the range. I want to know what this settled for, what are the issues arising, so that these can be prevented. Ultimately, it seems to me that
there's a failure in the system.
There is an absolute failure in the system.
Yeah, we recognise that. Like, I suppose we put a lot of effort in our HR side, in terms of kind of processes and systems and training up kind of our managers to ensure that kind of issues like this don't arise. But when they do, it is a failure. Somewhere.
It is, and I hear that, Mr. Finnegan, all of the time about processes, and I can't judge this. I don't know what percentage yet without looking at it. But every week we hear about processes, and every week they're failed. Only earlier on this morning in a private session, which I can't go into, the process itself had become abusive, I have to tell you, in another situation. That's my opinion, and certainly I would say of my colleagues. When we read about the process in a different situation, nothing to do with the actual process had become an instrument of abuse.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're left looking at that and dealing with it, which is not really our remit. We're looking at it. So I would think there are messages here to look at.
Yeah.
Okay. Finally, on the translation service and the translation of documents. Does that come under your remit?
It does.
Oh, great. Intug.
Yeah.
So, beidir go mai tú the sunry of which them call Wilmwich Inish module cursi astrucon, agus an chorus astrucon. What is the delay? Where are we with that? And just in relation to who provides the translation service for the Irish Committee? Is that outsourced to a company?
No, that's done by our own translators in Rannog and Astracan. We have booths, and it's done remotely.
You might just clarify all that for me, sir. I'm finished on that, Chair. Thanks very much.
I suppose just in relation to Rannog and Astracan generally, we have a very significant investment programme now in Rannog over the next 5 years.
Highlight the deficits for me and highlight just what's missing, because we know there's been a huge delay, significant delay into translating. So please tell me, what is the delay now?
Well, the delay, I suppose what we're doing now is the delay, I suppose, arose mainly because of inadequate resources within the Rannog, and we are in effect doubling the number of staff within that unit. And that basically will give us the capacity to produce acts by the middle of the following year. So we'll have a current translation of acts. Now, the second element then is that...
Just specifically now, so if we pass, I don't know, the parole...
If you pass the parole bill in March, we would aim to have that translated by September.
Of this year?
Of this year, yeah. Say if you say it's passed, the parole bill, say was passed today, it's July, we should have that translated by the end of the year.
From now on, is it?
That's what we're working towards, and we're putting in place the resources to do that.
But at this point, you're not able to do that?
No, but we're actually working towards it.
When is that point towards it? Cullinane pointe sin.
Cullinane pointe sin. Yeah. Tásúla go méid sé go leor, but
Tásúla compression of
we're actually scaling up the staffing in it. Just if I can maybe just give you some sense of kind of where we're at in terms of staffing. we've had competitions for Grada Hain, Grada Doe and Grada 3, and we have basically we've made offers to 2 people for Grada Hain. We will be making offers for Grada Doe, and that we've made offers in Grada 3. So we'll have 3 posts in clearance by September. So we're making progress.
Okay. Where are you making the progress from? Where are you at? What's this?
Just to explain to you, as part of the settlement of the case, we were given a period of time to get ourselves geared up because it's necessary.
Sorry, with regard to a settlement in a specific case in this area?
Correct, yes, the O'Murraku case, which was settled around Christmas time. And as part of the settlement, we committed to eliminating arrears over a 5-year period and ensuring that all acts are translated effectively on a current basis. Now, we recognised that it would actually take us time to put in place the resources to do that, and we have been doing that over the last number of months. It's not easy because there are a lot of options available to translators out there, which are very, very attractive, jobs in Europe, etc. And the other issue, I suppose, that we're contending with is for legislative translation, we require an exceptionally high standard of Irish. So we're undertaking our recruitment. As part of that process, we're looking at options if we cannot get people recruited through the normal means. So we will look at issues.
Okay, just again, because I'm conscious I'm taking time, and can I have a detailed note through the chair on where we're at? But this case was settled at Christmas, is it?
Correct.
So High Court proceedings were taken?
High Court proceedings were taken.
They were settled. There was a settlement agreement, and within that you gave an undertaking on a number of issues.
Correct.
And you'll set that out for us?
I will. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it took a case to make the changes?
We were working on it anyway. In terms of a capacity review, because we had PwC looking at the resourcing of Rannog and Astragon. I mean, we recognise that the Rannog has been under-resourced for a period of time, and in order to address that issue, we had to do a detailed analysis of the work and the type of staffing levels that were needed to translate acts on a current basis, and also then to translate the arrears of acts. And that was ongoing at the time of the High Court proceedings. So, in one level, we were actually fortunate that that process had actually started, and we were able to use that work.
How far back are we going for the arrears of translation?
The arrears, I'd have to give you pardon?
If I can just clarify.
Yeah.
They come back, they're back since 1992. So you're talking about, in the region, right up to the end of 2018, about 620 acts. So it is a significant body of work. They're all translated, but they're not edited and finalised for publication. As part of not only with the recruitment piece is around trying to go current. So the objective is to treat 2019 as year 1 and go current, so the publications should start hitting from next year. Yeah. But we have to get the staff up to critical mass, and at this point in time we're at 18 staff out of a target of 39. So we have a way to go. Yeah.
Is that, you've been very...
Sorry. Yeah.
But I would appreciate a detailed note on that, and it's something I'm going to follow up on.
And happy to meet you separately.
Thank you.
Well.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Back to the Secretary. The Secretary of Circulation. Okay, thank you, Deputy. Are you okay? And Deputy Murphy?
Yeah,
thank you.
And first of all, I have to declare a conflict of interest because I'm a member of the House of the Oireachtas Commission, so just do that in the first instance. But most of the questions I wanted to ask have been asked, so that removes a degree of the issue. And I'll be going in about 10 minutes time, so excuse me for if it appears that I'm walking out, but I will be here for obviously answers. Just in relation to page 17, note 2.5, in relation to prepayments, we know some of that related to the print equipment. Was that actually, when was that received? When it was it paid for? And that accounted for 1.8 million. What was the other 4 million? What did that relate to?
Sorry, just find the note now. knows the other costs. Sorry, just the figure of prepayments represents the goods and services that we paid for in 2018, which we had yet to receive. So in other words, we hadn't actually received the benefit of it. So the figure includes payments for insurance cover, software license, maintenance contracts, consultancy, advance fees, subscription and membership fees.
Could I just ask you in relation to insurance cover, why would you pay for that in advance?
Just, sorry. It's a small figure. It's actually travel insurance for people travelling. Yeah, abroad, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and just in relation to page 18, note 2.10 on matured liabilities. What does that relate to? It's 1.23 million.
Just give me 1 second. It's refund of fees. It's refund of illness benefit. Refund of fees. There's a refund of a broadband service.
So what was it about the broadband service?
It was a refund of a broadband service for a period in 2018. And there was reimbursement of expenses for DAL 100. There were certain items published in connection with that.
Again, it would actually...
I can provide you with detail.
Yeah,
that's helpful. Yeah.
That'd be useful. Yeah. Yeah. And just in relation to the members are a certain portion of the members are audited every year by an outside
10%.
10%.
Yeah.
I've been subject to it myself on a few occasions, and it's very robust. And really do go into detail. When is that? That's tendered for. When is that due to be tendered for again? Or
Just last year.
We tendered for it last year.
And it's over how many years?
I think it's a three-year with provision just for kind of an extension. That's the way the contracts works. And Mazars are the company that conduct the audit.
Right. Okay. And that didn't change from the.
No, it didn't. No. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It was a competitive tender.
It was an open competitive tender, correct? Yeah.
Okay. Just a final question, because a lot of the areas have been covered, are the final points in relation to, and I've got to say, we're, as member of the Commission, I know that we're briefed continuously on the building works in Leinster House, and indeed it's not only that, but it's visits of the house itself that are available, and photographic updates and things like that. And what surprised me was the risk of collapse and the risk of fire that was discovered, and so it was inevitable that work would have had to be done, but at least it's not been done in retrospect to some catastrophic event. And I mean, obviously, we have to get value for money, and it's under the remit of the OPW. But one thing that jumped out at me was how impossible it is to accurately estimate or actually do a tender because the contingency is limited to a certain figure.
Yes.
And that actually produces a piece of misinformation.
It does,
Because in a historic building, it's not going to be the same as refurbing a modern building where there would be the same set of circumstances that would pertain. I think it's going to be important that, in actual fact, I think it's going to be important to learn from that, not for the House of the Oireachtas, but for the OPW in terms of having a profile of appearing to underestimate, where in actual fact the estimate is. It's impossible to be right in a historic building, or almost impossible. I think that's an important point that really should be an amendment should be made to that.
Yeah, it's the standard form of contract, and the OPW have had to work with a contingency of 10%, as you correctly pointed out. But the reality is, for a project like Leinster House, Georgian Leinster House, with major restoration, the contingency can be up to 40%. So it's very important that there's a realistic contingency figures built into the contract, because otherwise it's actually very misleading. And maybe I might just take the opportunity just to place on record what I would regard as the absolutely outstanding work of the OPW, the team. We've had a superb team of architects led by Ciarán O'Connor, who's the state architect, and it has been a labour of love for them. This project, I have seen the level of commitment myself and the hours and hours that have been invested in this project by that team. And I mean, sometimes the public sector is criticised, and rightly criticised, for projects, but this is an example of a project that has gone well, that has been well managed, and that will leave a lasting legacy for generations of Irish people who come to Leinster House. And I must say, on a personal level, I'm really looking forward to the building being open so that people can come to Leinster House and see the outstanding work that has been done. And we will be putting in place kind of tours in the weekends in the autumn once the house is open, because I anticipate a very, very high level of interest in coming to see the refurbished building.
Yeah, and I'd concur with what you're saying there. The unfortunate thing is that we won't get to see, or the public won't get to see, some of the amazing lead work on the roof and things like that.
Incredible,
That hopefully we'll get a very long lifespan out of the work.
Just one of the things which I might just add is, I suppose, much like yourself, I have walked the site on a number of occasions, and what really struck me is the calibre of the craftsmanship that's involved in this project. Like, it's a tremendous gift to have those skills, and you see them at first hand when you're actually walking around that site, and it's really, really impressive.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you. I'll put just some questions myself here.
Yeah, thank you.
Finish up.
Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me. We mentioned quite a bit Oireachtas TV and all that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you just, by way of clarity, just some of us who are here, we don't get to see all these things. We hear people saying, I was watching you on Saturday morning, or I was watching you on Sunday evening, or whatever, right? And there's something out there that seems to run quite a bit of time, which is good. But you can send a note if you don't have it on this. Like, can you tell us, is that Oireachtas channel, where is it? Is it on RTE? Is it on Fairview? Is it on Sky? Is it on Virgin? Where is it?
It's everywhere.
Okay. You tell the public, because they're watching.
Tell the public. I suppose in designing the service and rolling it out, we were really conscious that people could watch the Oireachtas no matter what platform they were on. So we have it on Fairview first and foremost, which is a free service.
Right.
Fairview obviously kind of is really, really important, because a lot of people have it as kind of their second service within their household. We also have it on Sky. So the signals are transmitted up to the satellite and back down again. We have it on what's Virgin Media now, and we also have it on the web as well. So it's on every platform that's operative in Ireland.
On what web? The Oireachtas website?
It's It's on the Oireachtas website, correct, yeah.
Okay, ongoing.
Yeah.
And just so people know, because it's
And
important.
accessible via the app, the Oireachtas app.
Yeah. So that people know, do you know offhand what station number they are on your Sky, because it moved there sometime? Just
Michael, who has Sky,
it's 517. It's helpful to say this, but people often say, where can I find it?
It's 517.
Yeah, 517 Sky.
Yeah, I know on Virgin Media, I think it's, because I have that service, I think it's 207.
207.
207.
And it's on Fairview, it's easy
It's
to
on
find.
Fairview, which is easy to find.
It's on your website. And tell me, the numbers watching that versus, do you remember we used to have the old Oireachtas report, just go out on RT at 11 or 12 or half 12 at night. You know, I think the case was made, the numbers watching that at that hour had gone down to very confined. But there's a useful service in that, it summarised the day. There's a little bit of editing in that. It was a useful service, whereas now you can sit and watch us to your heart's content for several hours. Right. So have you what work have you done to know how effective having these TV channels on these places are in terms of viewers?
I think I suppose the TV must be looked in the context of our overall communication strategy, because it's one of a number of elements. And I suppose what kind of I find actually very interesting is that when you look at some of the polling that's been done recently, the trust in the institution here has gone up quite a considerable amount. Like, it's gone up 4 or 5 percentage points over the last number of years. Now, I mean, I'm not saying that that's entirely attributable to what we're doing in communications terms.
Research E-Commission, it's just
no, that's
other
independent research done by Eurobarometer, I believe. So trust in the institution here has gone up very considerably. And I think that's kind of due to obviously a number of factors, but I would like to think that part of the reason for it is what we're doing in terms of opening up the Oireachtas to people so that they can see for themselves what's going on here. And really a very strong objective of us is that people should be able to access the Oireachtas on whatever platform they choose. So kind of younger people will obviously use their mobile devices and look at things going home on the bus or in the evening time. Older people are the ones, the demographic that predominantly watch television. So I suppose what we're trying to do is we're trying to create an offering for all segments of the population so that they can see the work that's being done in Leinster House.
And is there an Oireachtas Facebook and a Twitter?
There's an Oireachtas Facebook, yes, and there's a Twitter feed.
And what's on that now? I mustn't be a friend of you, you know.
There's 31,000 people on Twitter.
Right.
And then there's a Facebook page.
And who manages that?
That's managed from our communications unit.
Right. And what does that do? Just what's happening today?
We use it, I suppose, a lot to promote other services, so we can kind of tell people what's coming up on Oireachtas TV. We can kind of do video links in terms of launches of reports and such like. And Twitter is a kind of a really useful tool for like cross-promoting what you're doing across other different platforms.
Okay, back to the big one that was mentioned here, the Angela Kearns case.
Yeah.
And I know there's a committee working to report to the Committee of Procedures, etc. Just run through the 4 points in the letter. You said the Supreme Court mentioned remit. I just want to discuss each of these with you now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Remit.
Just bear with 1 second. Sorry.
Melissa might help, right? She knows about that.
Sorry. That's great. Yeah, have it. Yeah. I mean, these are the issues that were obviously identified by the Supreme Court. So the first is kind of remit.
Okay, just before we get into discussion, first thing I have to say is the Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee fully accepted the decision.
Yeah.
I have no issue with anything they said. I've stated several times it's not a chilling effect. It actually can give us an opportunity to be proactive and improve how we operate. I don't see a negative in relation to the overall issue. Some people might present it that way. That's their affair. Yeah. Just ask yourself as Secretary General, do you fully accept the Supreme Court decision from, we'll call it the Oireachtas service point of view?
Absolutely.
And you're working to deal with it?
Yeah, we fully accept it.
Okay, on the remit, I think we can agree on this. The remit needs to be looked at.
Yes.
In terms of the remit of the various committees, whether that means people working within the remit or whether the remit needs to be enlarged or whether the remit needs to be narrowed. There's quite an issue to be looked at there.
These are all the issues that are off the table,
So work needs to be done there. So we accept what the Supreme Court says there.
Absolutely.
Then, in relation to the invitations, and I've said this publicly several times, witnesses get invitation. I think you, as Secretary General, will know no member of a committee or no chairman of a committee has ever seen over the decades the invitations that went out to the committee or to the witnesses. We've never had sight of that. So that needs to be addressed, among other things, in terms of the content of the remit. But definitely, there clearly was a failure, which I'm acknowledging. I'm accepting what the Supreme Court says, that the issue of invitations need to be dealt with, because the Supreme Court felt it was a significant enough issue to deal with. We as committee chairs, and every committee chair, this Dáil, last Dáil, previous Dáil, every committee must have felt, what are we talking about? We never saw an invitation. So that clearly is an issue that has to be dealt with, in terms of not only making sure members are familiar with what's in the invitation, but also that it's clear in what it says. So we're agreed on that. Then the next issue then was the third issue.
The issue is the conduct of meetings. So it's the conduct of hearings by the committee as a whole and the supervision of such hearings by the chair.
By the chair. So the role of the chair has come in, which I totally agree with. I'm chairing the Public Accounts Committee. I've chaired previous committees in previous Dáil, and I think you would accept. I think he said, I looked at your, 25, 28, how many committees have we? Something.
28, 28, including
so
the two bodies.
Say this, it shouldn't have taken the Supreme Court to tell us that if you have an Oireachtas of 218 members and 28 of them are being moved up, elevated to a position of chairperson, that there should have been a programme of training for committee chairperson. So the Oireachtas, we have all been collectively remiss in not having any actual programme for training chairpersons, given that the Supreme Court felt it was such an important issue. They specifically highlighted it. So it was good. So we'll do it now. We'll do it now. But it's now that you listen to what the Supreme Court said, it was blatantly obvious we should have done something in relation to chairing chairpersons getting some training. Because I'm sure within your own staff, if somebody is being promoted to a role they never were in before, there must be some element of training of what the new role is about. So I think we do accept that that's long overdue and very necessary, so we accept that. And then there was no remedies in place at all in relation to where there was a problem for a particular witness. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the interesting,
in other words, sorry. You carry on.
Yeah. The interesting thing actually was in the second case, the Dennis O'Brien case, there was a remedy. And the court acknowledged that, and that was a key factor in the decision of the court, that there was a remedy in place.
Okay. So, to summarise, I give my view, and you may concur now. Everything the Supreme Court said was patently obvious. Should be the case. Like, there's nothing they said you could quibble with. That's how I see it. Maybe that's my view. I'm not asking you, but you're working to implement that.
Yeah, no, we're absolutely working to implement it, and as I said at the outset, we absolutely respect the decision of the court in this case, and it is very helpful for the court to have identified these specific areas, which we will pursue now.
Okay, and the one suggestion I would make is the Oireachtas now, given that it has been told to deal with these 4 issues, we could take a very restrictive view and deal with the 4 specific issues, or use the opportunity of the Supreme Court to say, is there anything else we need to, rather than just taking a very restrictive, reactive approach to the Supreme Court decision, maybe take a more proactive approach in terms of issues that need to be dealt with, because we don't want to deal with these 4 and find in 8 years' time there's another 4 mentioned that we should have picked up on at this stage. I'm just saying we should learn not just the specifics but the broader lessons.
That's a very fair point, and I suppose by virtue of the fact that we're doing a consultation process with committee chairs and also kind of members of committees, you would hope that if there are other issues out there, it will be identified as part of that process, and we will be able to deal with them.
Okay,
because
that's great.
there's a level of expertise kind of among the people that we're actually going to.
Right. Moving on now to the building refurbishment. Approximately 17 million, approximately. Just tell us, so the public will be aware of this. It's a historic building, listed building. So would the Oireachtas, Leinster House is the building?
It's a historic building.
Yeah. So that wouldn't have been subject to planning.
There was planning
through Dublin City Corporation, if that's the planning authority we're in, like in a normal building. No, it would be exempt.
The OPW have through their own statutory arrangements, carry out what they call a Part 9 planning process, where they put up the normal information boards, etc., that you would associate with planning permission, and then an independent assessment is carried out within the OPW, taking in the views of people like Dublin City Council and anybody else who would come forward with submissions, the same as any other planning permission. The only difference being it's the OPW as a state body makes the decision rather than the relevant local authority.
So the OPW makes its decision in relation to the works the OPW is going to carry out.
In respect of things like state buildings, Garda stations,
yeah,
etc.
We see there's nothing wrong with what's been done, but it's a bit unusual in this day and age. An organisation that carries out the work is the organisation that gives itself the permission to carry out the work. I just leave that out there.
Well, I should say that the OPW, in fairness to them, have a very rigorous process of what you might call Chinese walls, where those making the decision are not in any way associated with the people, you know, who you might call sponsors or advocates for the project.
Right. All I'm just saying, as Chairman of the PAC, and there's nothing unusual, this committee doesn't share your confidence in the ability of the OPW. This project started with whatever it started with. Now it's whatever it is. We've had them here, special report to the CNAG. I'm moving the Department of Health from Hawkins House down to Museum Plaza. We found the procedures not as good as we would have expected. So I'm just saying OPW are very competent. I can understand some people saying that, but the PSE hasn't found that always to be the case. So I wouldn't be able to share your 100% confidence, and that's not a reflection on you. It's a comment about OPW in relation to what we find in front of them at this committee. And just because they're the OPW doesn't make them right in everything they do. But yeah, so they would be exempt from the normal planning process that. Okay, that's fine. That's all I'm saying, because it's this. And then would the same apply to a fire cert? You know the way all public buildings have to have a fire certificate from the local authority. Would there be a fire certificate for each of the different buildings in this complex?
There's not a fire certificate for this building because it's a building that existed. Some of the parts of the building existed before the building control legislation, but the OPW have their own central arrangement for fire certificates and carry out their own fire tests.
Yeah.
So they have a parallel process to what you might call the private sector fire certificate.
But again, they're issuing fire certs for buildings for which they do the work. It's the same point. We're back to the same moot point. I'm not saying there's a problem, but I'm just saying, I'm pointing out the difference in approach. Energy rating now. What's the energy rating of the building that we've just refurbished, spent to 17 million now?
We'd have to speak to the OPW. It's not.
Oh my God! And all the talk about climate change in this building, and we can't answer that.
I know from kind of talking to some of the people on site, like that, when you're dealing with a historic building, there is a limit to how much you can achieve in terms of kind of energy rating. Just on the overall issue, kind of sustainability, etc. One of our key goals now over the next 3 years is to develop a sustainability plan for the Oireachtas. As recently as Tuesday, the House of the Oireachtas Commission agreed to a biodiversity plan for Merrion Lawn, which is going to be implemented now over the coming months. And we're acutely aware of the need to make progress in this area. We're in discussions with the OPW about installing electric charging points for cars. And we aim to basically kind of progress these initiatives now over the course of a number of months alongside our sustainability plan.
Okay, so that's... and what's the method of heating for the building that's been refurbished?
Just on the energy, just if you could maybe go to this before I answer your question. Basically, for 2018, our facilities unit reported a 27.8% saving on energy efficiency, and this is the energy indicator used for reporting to the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, and will be the data that's included in this SEAI's annual report. And a key focus of the energy management activities at the Oireachtas has been the participation in optimising power at work. It's an energy awareness campaign in place in 300 buildings owned or leased by the OPW, and it aims to reduce CO2 emissions. by reducing energy consumption in the public sector.
So that's for all OPW buildings, the 300
It is,
buildings.
yeah, yeah.
It's not for the... So back to a refurbished building, the 17 million. What is the heating system in that? Is it gas? Is it oil? What's going to be in the basement keeping us?
It's the gas-fired system that operates from...
Pardon?
It's the central heating system that operates up by the Department of Agriculture that heats all of the buildings here.
And,
So I think
and what's the source of the fuel?
I think it's gas.
You think?
Gas and wood pellets.
Gas and wood pellets?
Yeah.
Right, so we're going to ask you to send on a note in relation to the energy rating of the building that's been fully refurbished and the format of fuel that's used to, heat or cool the building, as the case may be. A lot of hot air. We could generate quite a bit of that sometimes, but it has to be cooled as well. But I'm just saying, I would have thought, given that all the talk about climate change, we've had a climate change committee, we're setting up a new climate change committee, we've actually had the Department of Climate Change in here, and we asked them about what changes have made in your own head office, and the answer is a bit like your own answer. There wasn't an answer, and I'm just saying, somewhere in the public service, we have to begin to practice what we're preaching. That's all I'll say on that one. In relation to security of the building,
Yes.
I raised this. And we're talking about last year, whenever. There were one or two occasions where members couldn't get out through the front gate.
Yeah.
It does require you, I think any national parliament should be able to have guaranteed access for members. It hasn't happened on every occasion. Sometimes the protesters were allowed up to the gate. Maybe the numbers were higher than people expected. Maybe there wasn't enough whoever on duty outside. I'm just saying, I presume that's on your risk register.
It is, yeah, and we're in close consultation with the Guards. We have an annual security meeting with the Guards and members of the Defence Forces, and those, without getting into detail or anything like that, those things are considered.
Yeah, okay. And then, now that you mentioned the Defence Forces, we have the Army patrolling the building at night. Is it you pay them or teachers officer? Who pays who for them? Because I didn't see it in your allied net expenditure.
It's not us. It's not us.
You'll find out for us.
We will find
there are
out
soldiers patrolling the building every night. I would have, in the normal course of events, expected to see a cost in there from the Department of Defence under net allied.
I imagine it's a single picket, I think, for government buildings. So
it's the military police.
I'm aware of that. That's why I asked the question. But I want to get it out there in the public arena, right? Okay. So you'll send a detailed note that we can publish. So because people would like to see that. Next question, then, I just want to ask the staff numbers. You mentioned in your opening statement that there's 2,027 staff on the payroll system, and includes, I presume, pensions.
Pensioners,
Can you just, rather than going into it now, can you send us a breakdown? Just send a breakdown of who they are, the categories, who are retired members, who are retired staff. Some of them translate them back into whole-time equivalents, both for the member staff and the civil service staff, because I see here you have 564 on your own payroll here, and then I see 450 for member staff. But I can't work it up to the 2027 that you mentioned in your statement. So just
I have the data, and I'll send it on to you.
Just call it out there for people watching. We'll be watching tomorrow and the next day.
We have political pensioners and former MEPs 235, former members pensioners 418. Civil service and catering staff above junior clerk 340, and then we have a weekly payroll which would consist of political staff, clerical officers, staff in the bar, catering, ushers, service officers and cleaners. That's 815, and then we have members 218, and we actually have one MEP.
And where's the member staff?
Member staff are included there.
In which figure? The 800?
Yeah, they're in the weekly payroll numbers there.
Okay. Just to your new IT system,
yes,
which I'm sure is very good and has been rolled out, as we speak. The training, I know you said a lot of benefits to it. What training have you offered to your staff here for that? To upgrade them, or did you go to a course in-house, or how was that done?
Yeah, we have quite a considerable amount of ongoing training in relation to ICT. I'll just get you the note on it.
Yeah.
have to actually send it on.
I'm happy for you to send it on.
Yeah,
yeah, we don't need it now. It's just when I saw the 2,000 figure, I didn't gel with me. The big issue I want to raise with you about training is that, and I'm making a suggestion to you, a practical suggestion, and I don't think it will cost much at all. Is the member staff. I see there's two great categories of staff. There's the civil service staff, which you look after, fine. There's the member staff are out there. They're not civil servants. They're out there somewhere. They can kind of toddle along as they like. But the group I'm most concerned about is the member staff who operate in constituency offices. They have zero personal contact with here, only the other end of dot extension 4444 if they want to get something in IT. And a system comes in and somebody comes down and wires it up in the day and he's gone. I'm making a suggestion to you. It would be a big help to the operation of the Oireachtas, is that if you could put a programme in place, even for half a day a year, to visit the constituency offices to train the staff, member staff in constituency offices, because they've no access. They're not going to come from all over the country to come up here for a day's training twice a year. It's not going to happen. All it will take is one or two of the people who do the training, do a programme. You know, your staff go around to install the equipment. All it takes is somebody to come a week later and give them the few hours training. Because things do change, and one changes. This is not on this system, it was on the last system. It's not a big cost. You're sending people around with the hardware. I think you should also send people around to just a bit of help with the software, because they are Oireachtas. They're making the whole system work. And I do feel they're the utterly poor relation when it comes to actual training. I know you'll say emails go out offering training, but I'm more interested in take up the training, not emails out. So you might look at that. And there wouldn't be a good, there wouldn't be a big cost in that, right?
We look at that.
Okay, and I know I can echo that view from lots of deputies whose staff are not based in the premises. In terms of staff, just talk to me about the additional research staff and parliamentary budget office staff. The library and research, thank you, whoever is listening. I got my document from you yesterday, my research document for the last couple of weeks ago. But how many staff are involved in that research area for the versus the parliamentary budget office staff? Because it's just an impression that we regularly get very good updates from the parliamentary budget office, and I know the committees could do with some dedicated research resources across the board. You know, so I feel the parliamentary budget office and that committee that they work with has a very high level of research staff available. We see the stuff coming out on a weekly basis, or sometimes much more often, whereas many of the committees could possibly do with a slice of that research facility. Talk to me on that.
Okay, I suppose the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is now coming in its second year, has 13 staff in total. 13? 13, yeah, 13. Its director is Annette Connolly, who's at Assistant Secretary level. It has one principal officer, Denise O'Connell, who's just behind me, 5 assistant principals, 5 administrative officers and 1 clerical officer. And I suppose the PBO provides a service for all of the Oireachtas. It works, you know, obviously with the Budget Oversight Committee in relation to budgetary matters, but its publications are available to all of the members. In terms of committees, the overall number is about 81. Which
81
is
what?
81 staff on
committees. No, I'm talking about research staff. No.
Sorry.
Research staff.
Sorry, library and research staff. Sorry, just, the library and research service in total has 30. Sorry, the research staff, sorry, I see it here, has a staff complement of 18 in the library and research service.
And they're the ones, if I want something done on the topic, I send in my thing and get my answer, which is good.
Yeah, but we do have 9 vacancies at the moment.
Wow.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah, it's a problem for us.
So there is an issue there. I'm sure it's good for people's CV to say they worked here for a couple of years. That has to be good for people. I thought it would be a good place for. They'll probably move on then.
It's really good. Yeah, they're kind of very much in demand. You know, once they get a few years in the Oireachtas under
It's
their
good on
belts,
their CV.
They
I mean
are
that
talented.
in a positive way.
Pardon?
I mean that in a positive way.
No, absolutely. Like, I suppose it's a positive thing for us, like, because I mean, it helps us attract, but it does mean that you have this turnover, and like what we're interested really is in kind of bringing in the best people we can. They may stay with us for short period or a longer period. And if they stay for a short period, they move on and we try and replace them. And
just ask you to look at the research facilities for committees, because some committees might have some, others might have none. Some member staff can be very good at it, other member staff. It makes for a better Oireachtas if more prepared people. It's only a suggestion. That's all. I just look at that. So I think at this stage we're done.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we're well ahead of the vote, so that's good. So nothing uncontentious. So I do want to thank you all for coming. We meet you in the corridors most days, and it's good to meet you. This is, I'll call just a formal setting on this particular occasion, but nevertheless, you're as friendly and courteous and as helpful here today as you always are when we meet you outside, in the normal course of work. So I do want to thank our witnesses today from the House of the Oireachtas Service for their attendance and the information provided for today's meeting, and I want to thank the CNA&G for his officials, and I would also wish everyone here a pleasant summer. So we will agree that the clerk will seek any follow-up information requested or any follow-up actions. We are going to have an informal meeting of members of the PAC at 2:30 on a private matter, so it was not it's not an official meeting, it's an informal meeting of some of our members, just to say that. So the meeting is adjourned sine die. Thank you.